Chapter 348. The night passed quickly. Soren got up early the next day because the third batch of supplies from Snake Island had arrived. Snake Island was the transit station of the overseas base. There was a killer whale that was about to mutate into a sea monster. It was a very safe place. Now the killer whale was almost the size of a blue whale. Basically, a slightly smaller ship could not even withstand a hit from it. The sea near Snake Island had been divided into a restricted area by Soren. He was afraid of being attacked by the pirate King Ashrod. As long as it was not Soren's ship near that area, it was likely to be attacked by this mutant killer whale. About half a month ago, there were merchant ships from the shipwreck sea. No one knew if it was a real merchant ship or a spy of the pirate King Ashrod. Anyway, it was directly hit and sunk by the mutant killer whale. No one was left alive on the ship. Since then, the others had learned a lot. It took a bloody massacre to make them understand that Soren's words were not a joke. Snake Island stored a large number of supplies, many of which were directly supplied to the overseas base. This could reduce the travel time. It was also easier to avoid other people's eyes and ears. After all, there were too many forces in Port Tylon. Not far from the camp, the leader of the Drow warriors, Dark Blade Andri, was waiting in front. "Your Excellency, Throat Cutter." When he saw Soren approaching, he quickly bowed his head slightly, and then said, "I have sent those dragon eggs to the priest. There should be no problem with hatching, but it's hard to say whether it can be tamed successfully. Because we have been away from the Underdark for too long, there are very few people in the tribe who know how to tame petrifying lizards. But we will do our best." Hearing this, Sauron looked at him with a rather cold attitude, and then said, "Yes. I know." After that, he left directly. Only the Drow warrior leader was left standing in place. Dark Blade Andri looked a little nervous. After hesitating for a moment, he did not immediately follow. Instead, he waved his hand and called a Drow ranger. He frowned and said, "He is already a little impatient with us. Those damn women haven't come to a conclusion yet. At least they should say something, right? I'm worried that the Throat Cutter will become more and more dissatisfied with us." The young Drow ranger was also nervous and whispered, "Recently, many important positions in the defense have been taken over by those pirates. We basically can't do anything about the warehouse. Those pirates obviously want to prove that they are not inferior to us. I'm afraid that if this continues, we will be replaced. Besides, those pirates are humans, and we are all Drows. I'm also worried that if this goes on, Cutthroat will." At this point, the young Drow ranger paused. The two of them looked at each other and couldn't help but shake their heads. Dark Blade frowned and pondered for a moment. Suddenly, he gritted his teeth and said, "These damned females are really stubborn. We're obviously living under their roof, but they're still behaving like slaves." The Drow ranger also showed a thoughtful expression on his face. He suddenly lowered his voice and said, "Master Dark Blade, the Drow warriors are very supportive of you. Moreover, your reputation is not inferior to any of the priests, but because they are females, their status has always been higher than yours. I think that since we have gradually integrated into the surface world, maybe some customs should be given up. As males in the group, we bear more responsibilities, but we don't have the corresponding status. It's time to make some changes. If Master Dark Blade is willing to stand up, I believe that many Drow warriors and rangers are willing to support you." Silence. Dark Blade fell into silence when he heard the words, but there was a flash of light in his eyes, which seemed to be a little scorching. Inside the Drows, the status of male Drows was quite low, and they basically did not have much power. Even in the belief of the Dark Maiden, the female Drows still firmly occupied a dominant position. After thousands of years of inheritance and accumulation, the male Drows were not without complaints. It was just that the customs of the group had been deeply rooted, and the rule of the female Drows was still unshakable. But now that they had come to the surface world, maybe they had a chance to make some changes. In the Underdark, if a male Drow of any family ascended to the position, he might be ridiculed by other Drow families. He might even be regarded as challenging the dominance of the female drows, so he would be punished by the Queen of Spiders or even besieged by other drow families. But this was the surface world, and no one would attack them because of this. A cold light appeared in Dark Blade's eyes. He slowly clenched the hilt of his sword and said in a deep voice, "Give them another chance. They don't know the strength of the throat cutter, but we can't let our people be dragged into the abyss of eternal damnation." Soren's means were too ruthless. All along, he had given people the impression that he was decisive. Dark Blade was worried that something terrible would happen when His Excellency Throat Cutter ran out of patience. The port. As soon as Soren arrived at the port, he saw the priest of the goddess of riches in front of him. Gold was still dressed in jewelry, like a graceful and luxurious lady, but unfortunately, she looked a little bit vulgar. If there was a word to describe the love of the believers of the goddess of riches, then Tycoon Gold was definitely their favorite color. "Your Excellency." Cyclops had been waiting for a long time. When he saw Soren, he immediately handed over a list and said, "This is the goods that were sent here. Then here is the news sent by the Sea Temple." "Okay." Soren reached out and took a look. He immediately said, "The supplies allocated to the drows will be reduced by half, and the rest will be allocated as rewards for the Eastern craftsmen." After that, he opened the letter sent by the Sea Temple. After a few glances, Soren couldn't help but frown, and then silently put it away. "Your Excellency." Gold came over with a smile on her face. She played with the agate ring on her index finger and slowly said, "It seems that we can sign the agreement. We have taken a fancy to the land, from the slope in front to the land here. We are willing to buy it at a price that will definitely satisfy Your Excellency. At the same time, if you have no problems, the City of Wealth will soon send people to support Your Excellency in the construction of the port." What a big appetite. Soren glanced at the place she pointed and found that the location Gold picked was quite tricky. She marked out nearly 1,000 acres of land in one breath. From the port to the border there, almost 1/3 of the most useful land was taken away by her. And her pointing was equivalent to including 1/3 of the port, which made Soren a little hesitant. "Your Excellency, don't rush to refuse." Gold had been secretly observing the changes in Soren's expression. After noticing that Soren seemed to disagree, she immediately said, "The fleet of the City of Wealth has set off yesterday. Maybe after you see our strength, there will be new changes immediately. Money has the most powerful magic. I believe we will not let Your Excellency down." Speaking of this, she couldn't help but show a confident and playful smile at the corner of her mouth. Soren was silent for a moment when he heard this, and then put away the letter directly. The priest of the goddess of wealth in front of him was more well-informed than him. The fleet of the City of Wealth had set off yesterday. What she said was already equivalent to showing her strength. The foundation of a god's church that had stood for thousands of years was indeed far beyond his, a pirate king who had just established his foundation. Camp Warehouse. Soren had just returned here, and the half-elf first mate was already waiting. "Your Excellency." The half-elf first mate bowed slightly after seeing him, and then handed over a well-made leather armor, and said in a rather excited tone, "We have asked the craftsmen to make more than a dozen dragon leather armors. This is one that was just made today. I have tested it briefly, and its protective ability is not worse than inlaid iron armor. At the same time, it is much lighter to wear. Please take a look, Your Excellency." Completed? Soren heard the words and showed a smile on his face. He reached out and glanced at it, then weighed it and was quite satisfied. "Not bad. But this seems to be dragon leather armor made of Quetzalcoatlus. What about the other part?" The half-elf first mate heard the words and quietly approached a little, and whispered, "The other part is more difficult to make. It may take a while, but the quality should be better than this batch." Soren nodded and said, "Let them finish as soon as possible. After a while, we may have to clean up the nearby aborigines." The half-elf first mate showed a bloodthirsty smile on his face and nodded heavily. "Your Excellency, don't worry. The task will be completed within this month. Item type, dragon leather armor, +1, item grade, rare, grade 1, item description, This is a leather armor made of Quetzalcoatlus' dragon skin. Compared to other armors, it is stronger and lighter, and has quite good protective ability. Some of the characteristics of dragon subspecies dragon skin are retained in the leather armor, so it has good durability against fire, ice, and acid. It will not be easily damaged by the enemy's attack. In terms of craftsmanship, this dragon leather armor is a little rough, and it did not reach the best effect, but it still has the potential to be enchanted. Requirements: 8 points of strength. Because it is dragon leather, it is heavier than other leather armors. Equipment effect: dragon subspecies dragon skin, tough, defense level +5. Weapon special effect: dragon subspecies dragon skin. This dragon leather armor has the defensive ability of dragon subspecies. It can directly resist any attack below 5 points of attack. When receiving most attacks, it can reduce the damage received. Weapon special effect: tough. This dragon leather armor is quite tough, so it is not easy to damage it when receiving attacks. Strong acid and fire also can't easily damage it. Dragon leather is really different. Soren held the +1 dragon leather armor in his hand and nodded with satisfaction. This defensive ability was not weaker than the inlaid steel armor. If he used it to store his subordinates, their battle strength would definitely increase by a lot. Unfortunately, Soren could not wear armor. This was because wizards had a higher chance of failure when casting a spell to pierce through armor, especially those heavy full-body armors. The failure rate of casting a spell could increase to more than 50%. The only advanced class that could cast spells while wearing armor was the Arcane Knight. They had a unique ability called casting while wearing armor. Arcane Knight, advanced class, has the abilities alertness, iron will, advanced skill, combat casting, ability, focus. Can cast spells while wearing any armor. Remark: one of the advanced heroic advanced classes, a class that specializes in both magic and martial arts. It was basically impossible for Soren to wear armor. There were too few arcane knights, so it was very difficult for him to learn the ability, casting while wearing armor, from them. Therefore, he could only think of ways to get a legendary enchanted robe. The legendary robe also had a strong defensive ability. It could even be directly enchanted with an energy shield without affecting the user's agility. A busy day had passed. In the evening, Soren took a stroll around the camp after dealing with many things. He also wanted to take a look at the wizard Saruman's research progress. The reclamation of the land was almost complete, and it would not be long before the seeds were sown. The fertilizers had to keep up with the progress, or the harvest this year would definitely not be enough. There were no weeds around the camp now, and the neat roads could be considered to be connected in all directions. The wizard Saruman's laboratory was in the northern corner. He seemed to like studying the plants in the tropical forest. Soren soon arrived at an independent courtyard. There were specially set up spell traps nearby. Relying on his thief's intuition, Soren easily found them. At the same time, the alarm trap set up by Saruman also noticed Soren's arrival. "Welcome, sir." The door to the courtyard opened automatically. There was a simple alchemy circle, and then Saruman's voice sounded from it. "I'm almost done with the things you need. I'm in the middle of an experiment, so I can't leave for the time being. You can come in directly." Soren glanced around, and then entered the courtyard. As soon as he entered, he saw some strange plants. They looked a bit like nepenthes, and there were many other plants that were not easy to identify. These plants were planted around the courtyard, and there was a special fence around them. There was a sign in front of each plant, recording the time it was planted and so on. "This is..." Soren frowned slightly, and muttered, "Man-eating flowers? Did he plant these plants? It should be those strange plants." Although the size was different, and they lacked the aura of a living creature, it should be the man-eating plants in the forest. The difference was, the ones in the forest were like living creatures, but the ones in front of him were a bunch of plants. "Sir." Saruman walked out of the room, bowed slightly and made an inviting gesture, and then said, "I've already completed the first step of the things you need." He saw Soren observing the plants, and his expression changed slightly. He then pretended to be relaxed and said, these man-eating plants are very interesting, I'm studying them. Oh, right. These plants are the fertilizer you need, and you can see that they're growing very quickly. Soren was very sensitive to Saruman's unnatural behavior, but he didn't ask too much. After all, they were only in an employer-employee relationship. Wizards had a very special hobby. As long as it wasn't something dangerous, Soren would tolerate it. He had dealt with necromancy wizards before. Compared to those wizards who studied corpses all day long, Saruman's hobby was nothing. So he got up and entered the room, and immediately saw a lot of bottles and jars, and many glass test tubes. For a moment, it made him feel like he had entered a chemistry laboratory. Alchemy. A field that included potions, enchantments, engineering, magic runes, and so on. Even the creation of souls was within the scope of alchemy. It was a very profound field of research. In the laboratory, there were 3 apprentices busy, and next to them was a clumsy clay golem. This clay golem looked very stiff, as if it didn't have a soul, and just stood there holding a strange instrument. "Sir, please take a look." Saruman took out a box, and inside it was something the size of a grain. It smelled like urea. He reached out and touched his beard, smiled and said, "This is what you want. I've already tested it, and it's very effective on any plant." Soren picked one up and observed it. This was a little different from the fertilizer he remembered, but it wasn't too far off. Using guano stones to turn into fertilizer wasn't a very high-end process. He gently put it back and said, "How's the production?" "This." Saruman's face was a little embarrassed, and his voice was a little lower as he said, "The daily production is about this much." Soren couldn't help but frown and said, "No. It's too little. How much could there be in this box?" The amount of land he needed to cultivate was quite large, and there were nearly 1,000 slaves in charge of farming the land. This amount of production was simply not enough to meet the needs of farming. "I know." Saruman hurriedly said, "I'm trying to find a way to modify the alchemy tools. If I succeed, the production will increase a lot." "Okay." Soren nodded, patted him on the shoulder and said, "Increase the production as soon as possible. My request is not only to meet the needs of farming here, but also to make it into a commodity. I think you should understand." Saruman nodded seriously and promised, "At the end of the month, the production will meet your requirements. P.S. The camp has developed to the point where it is close to a town, so it needs a name." Fu too couldn't think of a suitable name, so he could only ask for the name of a city. If anyone thinks of it, you can leave a message in the book review section. Chapter 349. After getting Saruman's promise, Soren felt a lot more relieved. Since he promised to complete the task at the end of the month, he would wait for a while. Before leaving, Soren couldn't help but glance at the man-eating plants again. He didn't know if it was his illusion, but he actually found that the plants moved strangely. These mutant plants were a bit special. He hoped that Saruman's research on them would not cause any trouble. It was almost evening. Soren walked around the camp, then he was ready to go back and continue to study Melf's minute meteors. This low-level god-slaying spell was really not a joke. Soren had been analyzing the spell model for so many days, but he still hadn't made much progress. In the structure of the spell model of Melf's minute meteors, there were many quite complicated spell nodes and spell circuits. If the spell model was compared to a circuit board, then the other level 3 spells were at the level of a calculator, and Melf's minute meteors was at the level of a computer. This required quite an amazing memory and analytical ability. According to Soren's estimation, the difficulty of mastering it was almost higher than level 6 spells. The sea breeze blew from the side. Soren walked along the road and then came to the west gate. As soon as he arrived here, he saw the patrolling guards a little panicked, but it didn't seem to be a big deal. Your Excellency." When the guard captain in charge of training saw Soren, he immediately trotted over and said, Miss is leading a dragon for a walk over there." "A dragon?" Soren was startled when he heard the words, then he hurried over there. As soon as he walked around the gate, Soren saw Vivian in front of him, wearing a black princess dress and walking quite happily. Her expression was a little smug. Behind the little girl was a Quetzalcoatl the size of a hound. It seemed to have just hatched a few days ago. At this moment, she was tying it around her neck with a pink rope, and then walking it like walking a dog. The newly hatched Quetzalcoatl was not big, but its eyes were full of fierceness. Occasionally, when someone passed by nearby, it would open its mouth and growl. It also raised its dragon wings and pretended to pounce. The growth cycle of dragon creatures was slow, but they had combat power very early. The baby dragon could fight as soon as it was born and ate the dragon egg. The pure-blooded baby dragon had a challenge level of 1 when it was born, and it could easily kill an adult man without combat training. In 3 to 5 days, the baby dragon would grow fangs and claws, and the challenge level would increase to level 2 to 3, and be able to kill some newly advanced professions. Although the Quetzalcoatl in front of him seemed to have just hatched, it was still easy to kill 1 or 2 adults. The untamed Quetzalcoatl was full of ferocity, and it was being pulled forward by Vivian with a rope. The little girl's it seemed that it had suffered a lot at the hands of the little girl after it hatched. The dragon whelps would not treat the first person they saw as their parents. The dragon race's hereditary memory was no joke. They could still tell the difference even if they did not look alike at all and smelled completely different. It was a lot more dangerous to raise a sky dragon than a wild wolf cub. That was why Soren didn't want the girl to raise one. Brother. Vivian soon discovered Soren behind them. The little girl let out a cheerful cry, and then used a rope to pull the Quetzalcoatl over. The newly hatched Quetzalcoatl could not fly yet, and its running speed was not fast either. It was forced to crawl forward. Look! Vivian looked as if she was presenting a treasure. She raised the pink rope and kicked the Quetzalcoatl with her little foot. She pulled the Quetzalcoatl in front of Soren and said happily, "The dragon egg hatched. Big brother, look! It's called Little Black. Doesn't it look very impressive?" Little Black, Soren's mouth twitched when he heard that. He then forced himself to nod and said, "Yes, it looks very impressive." Hee hee. Vivian laughed happily when she heard that. She then waved her little hand and led the Quetzalcoatl forward. She wanted to take it for a walk so that the others could get to know it. The people here were quite violent. She didn't want Little Black to be killed by these ferocious guys the next time it went out to play. The little girl's steps were very happy. Her little hand was holding a rope, and she was dragging the ferocious Quetzalcoatl behind her. Occasionally, other people would be shocked when they saw her. Everyone would probably know that the young mistress had a dragon by tomorrow. But it was indeed very impressive. Other people were walking dogs, but she was walking a dragon. Seeing the little girl so happy, Soren could only shake his head and let her be. Dinner time. Vivian came back with the Quetzalcoatl. The newly hatched Quetzalcoatl had a huge appetite. If there was enough food, they could gain 3 to 5 pounds a day. In about half a year, this Quetzalcoatl could reach a weight of about 1,000 pounds. The cat girl in a small maid costume was responsible for feeding it. She carried a big wooden bucket with one hand, which was filled with fresh fish that was sent over from the port. The little cat girl seemed to be very playful. She grabbed a fish and threw it here and there. The Quetzalcoatl in front of her stretched its neck and caught the fish with its head. It opened its mouth and swallowed the foot-long fish in one bite. It had just hatched for a day or two, and this Quetzalcoatl could already eat a bucket full of fresh fish. Occasionally, the little cat girl would pick up a fresh fish and smell it. She seemed to like the smell of the fish. Unfortunately, she didn't dare to put it into her mouth after looking around. Because if she ate the fish raw, Vivian would teach her a lesson. She was a little afraid of Vivian. Especially when she was wearing a black princess dress, the little cat girl always felt bad and scared. A quiet day passed by just like that. Soren began to analyze the spell model of Amel's minute meteors after nightfall. Perhaps because of the accumulation of the previous few days, his research progress was slightly faster now. A magic lamp was lit in the spacious room. It felt like a 100-watt light bulb. This was an alchemy tool brought over by Gloria. There were also some alchemy tools made by the wizard Saruman. Because there were 2 more orthodox wizards around him, Soren also began to enjoy some of the more advanced conveniences. Most of the time, the wizard world was full of a sci-fi fantasy world. Soren still thought that there was not much difference between golems and highly intelligent robots. In some fields, golems were even more superior than robots. Soren, who was in a state of research, forgot about the passage of time. He didn't know how much time had passed. When he came back to his senses from the spell research, the sky was completely dark. Tap tap tap. A very light sound of footsteps approached from a distance, and then stopped in front of Soren's door. Vivian? Soren listened for a while, then put down the quill in his hand, and then put away a large stack of white paper. With the improvement of his strength, his perception and listening ability became stronger and stronger. The possibility of other rogues wanting to sneak attack Soren was quite low. Even in daily life, he was more sensitive than before. He got up and gently opened the door, and then saw the little girl standing in front of the door. Vivian was wearing a pure white nightgown and pink cotton slippers on her feet. There seemed to be a little tears in her beautiful big eyes, as if she had just woken up and was still a little confused. Brother. The little girl opened her small hands and threw herself into Soren's arms. Drops of tears fell from her beautiful big eyes. Soren quickly hugged the little girl in front of him, leaned over and kissed her forehead. He raised his hand and stroked her back, and said softly, "What's wrong? Why are you suddenly crying?" Vivian buried her little head in Soren's arms like a little kitten, and then whispered, "Brother. I dreamed of Heath. Heath. That loyal old dog." Soren's face showed a rare trace of sadness and nostalgia. He gently hugged the little girl in front of him, kissed her on the cheek, and said softly, "Don't cry. We buried Heath in the cemetery. He will rest in peace in the kingdom of the god of the underworld." Perhaps it was because she had a new pet, the little girl remembered the old dog that grew up with her. Soren was a cold person. There were not many people that he respected, and that old dog did what many people couldn't do. It was a loyal old dog. Soren could still remember how old the old dog was, but it still stood firmly by the little girl's side. Unfortunately, it didn't even have a full meal before it died. Instead, it lay in a corner and died peacefully. Because Soren had come back to life. And its mission was completed. Faith kept the old and hungry dog alive until Soren woke up. Then, it relieved itself of its burden and left peacefully in a deep sleep. Soren buried it in the cemetery because it was qualified to do so. Brother, Vivian seemed to feel a lot better after being touched by Soren. She raised her head and looked at Soren, and whispered, "Vivian has become so powerful. Can you bring Heath back to life? I miss him a lot." Silence. Soren fell silent. He stroked the little girl's long hair and kissed her forehead, but he didn't answer her question. Vivian seemed to have understood something. She curled up in Soren's arms with a sad expression. "Heath," the little girl's voice was choked with sobs. She murmured, "Is he really dead? Will he never come back? Hoo hoo hoo. P.S. That's all for today. I'll probably finish it in 10 chapters. Chapter 350. 3 days passed quietly. Soren was busy analyzing the spell model of Mel's minute meteors, and Gloria had been setting up a magic circle to seal off all the shadow cracks. It was easy to have accidents when infiltrating across planes. Whether it was the conflict of the plane's law causing mutations, or the creatures of the shadow plane sneaking into the material plane, it would be a very troublesome thing. So for Gloria, before unraveling the mystery of the shadow plane, she had to make sure that she could enter and exit freely. As a proper wizard, she would definitely leave a safe way out for herself. Soren's reckless behavior of going in and exploring belonged to the standard style of a rogue. Last night, Gloria came to Soren's place for the night, and she also mentioned Vivian's matter. She didn't know what happened to the little girl recently. She actually asked her a lot of questions about the soul level. She even asked where the soul would go after death, and how long a pure soul could exist without reincarnation. The final place where the soul of a living creature would go after death, and the law of the soul's existence and transformation. There were a lot of things that even Gloria didn't know. After all, she was just a wizard who had just touched the legendary realm. Maybe she had mastered the technique of injecting soul fragments into the rune life, but she couldn't explain a lot of knowledge about the soul level. Vivian carefully recorded everything down, and then asked her about some knowledge about legendary spells. At this point, Gloria also told Soren very seriously that the little girl seemed to have asked something about the legendary spell, Wish. This spell was also a taboo among wizards because it was a legendary spell that could theoretically fulfill most wishes, but it had a serious price to pay. The wish spell could resurrect the dead, increase one's own power, increase one's attributes, and even make one immortal. In theory, this legendary spell could fulfill most of the wishes of mortals, but the price to pay was hard to say. Soren was silent when he heard this. But he didn't say much, and just sighed softly. The wish spell was one of the most difficult legendary spells to master. The difficulty of just remembering this spell was frightening, let alone fulfilling the requirements to cast it. This spell ultimately summoned an elemental jinn. The effect was a bit like Aladdin's magic lamp. It might summon a jinn, or it might summon an earth jinn, or it might even summon the oldest elemental god. Currently, there were only a few people in the world who knew this legendary spell. In the blink of an eye, another day had passed. Soren's analysis of the spell model of Melf's minute meteors was finally on the right track, and the progress was close to 45%. As his progress increased, his mastery of the spell model became faster and faster. He estimated that it wouldn't take long for him to memorize it. However, on this day, the fleet of the Church of Wealth finally arrived at Port Mordor, and they also transported a lot of manpower and materials. Motor. This was the name given by Gloria. It originated from the divination of the Northern Witches. It was a character with a special meaning. She performed a simple divination on this place and finally decided to use this name. Soren didn't really care about this, so he directly named this place Mordor. The Church of Wealth formed a huge fleet. Their abundant financial resources allowed them to directly use ocean-going ships for transportation. When Soren had just arrived at Port Mordor, he saw groups of sallow and emaciated slaves being escorted down. These were all slaves from the mines. The Church of Wealth secretly controlled many mines, which needed a large number of slaves, and the probability of slaves working in the mines was very high. The Church of Wealth secretly controlled a large number of slave trades. Of course, money was not so clean, otherwise they would not cooperate with Soren, the pirate leader. The slaves transported by the Church of Wealth were very messy. Most of them were humans, but there were also other races. Soren even saw a small number of grey dwarfs. These were first-class slaves. They were the kind of durable slaves that were welcomed by many slave minds because they had been controlled by spirit flayers for a long time. Your Excellency. After the half-elf first mate received these slaves, he trotted over and said, "The statistics have been completed. A total of 632 slaves were transported, most of which were humans, and a small number of other races. 32 of them were infected, and some of them had died on the way here. They were thrown into the sea by them. Shall I go and settle them down now?" "Yes." Soren nodded slightly and did not have too much sympathy for the slaves. Such slaves could be seen everywhere in the world, and the slavery system was deeply rooted and even supported by many churches. Many of the past concepts were completely meaningless. Soon the slaves were escorted to the city of Mordor. Then, a gold priestess appeared in front of Soren. He didn't know why, but he always felt that this woman was too eye-catching. Maybe it was the gold color of her body that made Soren a little itchy. Everyone knew the habits of rogues. It was easy for them to not be able to control themselves when they saw such a tycoon. They wanted to sneak up and steal something valuable. Even if the jewelry on this woman was not a rare item, it was estimated to be worth more than 50 or 60,000 Kindler coins. High-grade priests were quite rich, and the priest of the goddess of wealth was even richer. Your Excellency. Gold came to Soren with a smile, then made a gesture toward the port and smiled. Then we'll start first. Rumble. A silent loud noise came from the port, and it immediately attracted the attention of many people. Then they saw several of the ocean-going ships put down their decks, then opened the heavy hatch, and let some huge puppet golems out. Most of them were clay golems and stone golems. These golems were about 3 meters tall, and they came to the port with dull footsteps. Then they moved forward under the control of a grade 3 wizard, and soon they arrived near the land that Soren had promised to the Temple of Wealth. Rumble. There was a loud sound of collapsing, and then there was the sound of rocks being flattened. The dozen or so puppet golems pushed forward like a large road roller. The stone golems were responsible for breaking the rocks, and the clay golems' bodies were slightly deformed. Then they worked like a small excavator, and soon the land was flattened. Golem craftsmanship. Soren's expression was a little shocked, and he was a little startled before he came back to his senses. The scene in front of him was quite impactful. Compared with primitive human labor, the golems in front of him were like the difference between modern technology and ancient civilization. However, this method consumed a lot of resources. There was no elemental pool in the wizard tower to charge the puppet golems. Such a large energy consumption must be made up with money. This difference was like the comparison of fuel consumption between riding a motorcycle and driving a tank. The golems' work efficiency was very high. They should be specially designed golems, not for fighting. In a very short time, the golems flattened the land and began to build a foundation. The clay golem was able to carry a large stone that required 2 adult men to carry, and the clay golem was able to carry it quickly with one hand. The stone golem could even lift a stone that weighed several tons and carry it away. Their work efficiency was probably higher than that of excavators and cranes, because the latter still needed people to operate, while the golems could be carried away directly. Your Excellency. Gold's face was a little proud, and he said proudly, "The strength of the Temple of Wealth will never let you down. At this rate, the port will be completed in half a month at most." Soren did not speak, because the scene in front of him gave him a feeling of being ahead of an era. While he was still desperately relying on human labor to operate, the hands of others had begun to give him the illusion of being semi-mechanized. Golems. Soren looked at these golems and could not help but fall into deep thought. Gloria's golems could not be brought out. They belonged to the witch council. She only brought a clay golem that was responsible for cleaning. However, Soren thought of another thing. War of the Golems. It was a big event that Soren remembered very deeply. It was also this event that let the world know the terrible strength of the legendary sword saint. The War of the Golems had not yet broken out. If no one triggered the red alert in the ruins, or if someone lifted the battle command of the Golem army in advance, would the War of the Golems eventually break out? If the Golem army was not destroyed, how much fighting power could they exert? One must know. At that time, some people estimated that their fighting power was equivalent to the main army of a duchy. If the Golem army had not triggered the red alert and went berserk, it would not have forced many legendary masters to appear in the end. Even the legendary sword saint would not have appeared on the battlefield of the War of the Golems. These golems seemed to have been given a final command to destroy everything, but before the command took effect, they were buried and sealed in the ruins. Later, some people explored the ruins and paid a heavy price to find the skeletons of the undead and demons. Some people speculated that a terrible plague of the undead broke out, or the demons invaded here, so the Golem army was given the final command to destroy everything. If someone could change this command, maybe everything would be different. Soren fell into deep thought. The War of the Golems was a battle of the legendary level. Many legendary masters had appeared one after another. The difficulty of exploring the ruins was also at the same level as that of the evil creatures in the desert. If he did not bring a legendary team in, he might not even know how he died. Note, most of the ruins related to the Arcane Empire were of the legendary level. The difficulty might not be much lower than the Wizard Tower in the Shadow Plane. P.S. Today's update. Tomorrow is almost done. There will be a surprise at the end of the month. Chapter 351. It was a sunny and windy day. In the morning, it drizzled a little, making the road a little muddy, but soon the sky was clear. It was almost February, and it was time to plant. With the help of thousands of slaves, Soren finally dug a ditch connecting the river and built a simple dam with the help of mud to stone. There was no doubt about the role of spellcasters. Mud to stone was jointly cast by Gloria and Vivian, and it was completed in just 2 days. Such a dam could transform mud into complete stones, and the effect was estimated to be much better than cement. The well-connected ditches were distributed in nearly 5,000 acres of arable land. This was the first land that Soren reclaimed. The abundant slaves allowed him to exploit the value of labor without worry. According to his estimation, he would complete at least 10,000 acres of land this year. 10,000 acres of land was enough to easily complete the self-sufficiency of Mordor. As long as self-sufficiency was achieved, Soren basically had no worries. Food, land, and population. These 3 elements were more precious than gold in chaotic times, and they were also the key to the realm of the gods in the future. Rumble. Suddenly, a muffled sound came from Soren's residence, and then Soren stood up excitedly. But it was a little different from the past. There were 2 fireballs floating in his palms, about the size of a fist. The flames were formed in a highly condensed state, and then suspended in his palms. As he moved, the flames jumped out of his palms. Mel's Minute Meteor. After such a long time, Soren finally remembered this level 3 spell. Rumble. Soren stood in place and took a deep breath, then looked at the surrounding environment. Then he jumped directly and rose to a height of about 12 meters. Then he waved his hand violently, and a fist-sized fireball whizzed out. Unlike the fireball spell, this flame was like a shot put, not an energy form like the fireball spell. The fist-sized fireball whizzed out at an amazing speed. The next moment, it hit the target in front of him, and then the target exploded into pieces of wood, leaving only a bare wooden handle. Boom! Boom! Explosions were heard one after another. In just 1 second, 5 targets were blown up in front of Soren. These training targets were basically blown to smithereens. Occasionally, 1 or 2 of them would be pierced through the middle and explode. The lethality was quite shocking. Even if Soren used the Elven War Bow +2 at full strength, he still wouldn't be able to penetrate these wooden targets that were almost 10 centimeters thick. Bang! Soren landed on one knee. The 2 fireballs floating above his palms had dimmed significantly. In less than a second, with his astonishing agility, he had launched 5 attacks in an instant. Mel's Minute Meteor, Extreme Spell. The lethality of Mel's Minute Meteor, which used Extreme Spell to turn into a level 5 spell, was a little beyond Soren's estimation. He could only make such lethality by slashing with his sword with all his strength, but this spell only needed to be thrown out. With Soren's current spellcasting level, a Mel's Minute Meteor, Extreme Spell, could make 11 attacks. According to his current attack speed, if he didn't consider the hit rate, he could finish it in 2 or 3 seconds. In the time it took him to be distracted, he could consecutively throw out more than 10 Mel's Minute Meteors. Rumble. All the targets were smashed, and Soren could only target the wall next to him. A Mel's Minute Meteor hit the wall, and a dent immediately appeared on the wall. The depth was close to 5 centimeters, and there was also a small explosion effect. The lethality was similar to an arcane missile. In other words, Soren's Minute Meteor's lethality was more than 30 points. Currently, he could only deal about 40 points of lethality without using his sword. Of course. As a level 3 spell, the role of Mel's Minute Meteor was not limited to this. The Minute Meteor it sent out was equivalent to a +5 level rare grade weapon, which could be easily converted to +5 penetration level. Most supernatural life forms could not be completely immune to the damage caused by it. Rumble. 5 consecutive Minute Meteors were smashed out, and a hole was directly blasted in the wall. Then the whole wall gradually cracked and finally collapsed. Your Excellency. Soon the voice of the pirate patrol guards came from outside, and a patrol team who heard the movement rushed over. Soren stopped, glanced at them, and waved his hand. "It's okay. You guys go to the warehouse and get some armor. Leather armor, mail armor, inlaid armor, and half-body armor, all of them." The subordinates quickly followed the order. About a few minutes later, they moved a pile of armor over. Soren waved his sword and made a temporary wooden frame, and then he asked people to put the leather armor on. 2 level 5 spell slots were memorized with Melf's Minute Meteor, maximized spell. Soren chanted again to cast the spell, and then 2 fist-sized fireballs appeared in his palm. He first smashed the wooden frame of the first leather armor. With a muffled sound, the leather armor exploded on the spot, and the front of the chest was blown out. The second experiment was the mail armor. Soren waved his hand and sent out a minute meteor. In the muffled explosion, the middle of the mail armor exploded, and a hole of about 10 centimeters appeared. Then it was the inlaid armor, and this one was even more blown out. However, when Soren tested the half-body armor, the effect was much worse. Because the half-body armor was more complete, it could be understood as a simpler full-body armor. Melf's Minute Meteor only blew out a hole, and it didn't directly destroy the armor. With Soren's current spell power and the ability, maximized spell, this was the limit of what he could crush. The half-body armor could barely protect against the damage of the Minute Meteor, and the full-body armor's effect would be better. The other armors were basically like paper under the penetration effect of a +5 rare grade weapon. This effect is comparable to a high explosive grenade. Soren waved his hand in satisfaction, and a hole was blown out in the ground, and then he ordered, "Clean up these things." The lethality was quite amazing. It was worth Soren's time to memorize it. The only disadvantage was that each spell only had 11 minute meteor bullets, and the hit rate had to be controlled by oneself. The minute meteor's speed was very fast, but whether it could hit the target or not depended on one's accuracy. This spell couldn't be controlled by the mind. To explain it in terms of data, it needed one's own hit rate. In this regard, Soren had an unintentional advantage, because no pure wizard could have a higher hit rate than him. A simple tidying up. Soren got up and went to the port to check. Because of the support of the Temple of Wealth, Port Mordor, which had the natural advantage of a port, had been initially completed. Now there was no problem with docking a batch of ships, and the next thing to do was to further expand the port. On the other side of the land sold to the Temple of Wealth, a house had now been built, but there was still only a foundation in the center, because that was where the Temple of Wealth was built. This group of filthy rich people actually insisted on using blocks of marble to build the temple. Anyone who knew a little about architecture knew how much manpower and money it would take to build all with white marble. There was not much marble nearby, and no marble mine had been found, so the materials to build the temple might have to be transported from other places. The somewhat paranoid priests of wealth thought that only white marble was worthy of the Temple of the Lady of Wealth, so they used a fleet to transport it from other places. This was simply wasteful to the point of making one's hair stand on end. They crossed the sea just to transport some marble to build the temple. He had to say that they were really rich. Soren couldn't ask what others did. Anyway, the land had been sold to them, and if they wanted to build the temple with marble, let them transport it slowly. If the Temple of Wealth developed too quickly in the port, Soren was a little worried. Priest Jean was still bedecked in jewels. This woman was actually quite beautiful, and she was quite experienced in dealing with people. Only her nouveau riche clothes made people feel uncomfortable, especially when there were too many unclean pirates here. When she saw Soren, she seemed to want to come over and talk to him, but at this time, a somewhat broken warship came into the port. The flag on it was broken, and it was hanging Soren's black flag. There was a situation. Soren's pupils shrank, and he rushed over in an instant. The warship quickly approached the port, and from afar, there were a lot of bloodstains, and some corpses on the deck. All of them were pirates under Soren's command, and some of them were elite troops that he had a good impression of. Now, all of them were lying on the deck as corpses. The battleship was covered with marks of swords and sabers. It was obvious that it had been through a fierce battle. Even the masts had traces of being hit by cannons. Some parts of the cabin were leaking slightly. The entire battleship was severely damaged. Your Excellency, throat cutter. Scarface, who was covered in blood, limped out with the help of an elite pirate. His left arm was already gone, and it was tightly wrapped with bandages. This kind of injury could not be stopped bleeding, and the wound was burned to death to seal the arteries. The nearly 1.9-meter-tall northern man pushed away his men who were supporting him, then staggered to the front of Soren. Then he knelt down with a thud and said with a face full of grief and indignation, "Your subordinate is incompetent. Snake Island has been captured by Asrid. Our brothers have all suffered heavy casualties, and we barely managed to break out and escape. But Snake Island has already been burned down by them." Crack. The wooden planks under Soren's feet cracked inch by inch, and his face turned pale in an instant. A strong murderous aura made everyone uneasy. How is this possible? Soren growled from his teeth, and said angrily, "Asrid's elites are all stationed on the Eastern Sea route. How could they have the ability to secretly attack Snake Island?" Scarface lowered his head and said with shame, "It's the people from the Rossard Merchant Guild. We did not expect Asrid to secretly collude with the Principality of Rossard. They ambushed Snake Island and caught us off guard." The Principality of Rossard? Soren gradually calmed down, and said in a low voice, "Rossard Merchant Guild? The Principality of Rossard? The Duke of Red Dragon's wife? Asrid has joined forces with them? What about the Sea Temple? Such important news. Did the Sea Temple not respond at all? Snake Island was attacked, did they not rescue?" Scarface's expression was a little gloomy, and he said slowly, "We sent out people to ask for help, but Snake Island fell too quickly. There is no news from the Sea Temple, and I don't know if the Sea Temple knows about this." Naga Siren Priest. Soren's eyes narrowed when he heard the words, and he stomped his feet, and the ground shattered. How could they not know at all? Port Tylon was not far from Snake Island. Soren had stockpiled a lot of supplies there, and he had sent a lot of troops to guard it. It was not so easy to capture Snake Island. How could the Sea Temple not know about it? Soren took a deep breath. The oppressive atmosphere made the others nearby not dare to breathe. After a while, he helped Scarface up in front of him and said in a deep voice, "Can you still fight?" Scarface, who thought he was going to die, suddenly raised his head and said with determination, "Yes." Snake Island fell. He almost thought that he was going to die. After all, it was a very important base for Soren, and he had stockpiled a lot of supplies. As the pirate leader of the Shipwreck Bay route, his responsibility was undoubtedly the greatest. It would not be strange if His Excellency Throat Cutter directly killed him. Priest Kim. Soren turned around and looked at the priest of wealth next to him. He bowed slightly and said, "Sorry to trouble you." Priest Kim's expression was also a little dignified. He nodded gently and said, "It's a small matter. Limb regeneration is not a troublesome magic. He will soon be able to fight again." "Okay." Soren nodded slightly, and then ordered his men in a deep voice, "Gather everyone to the council hall." A dignified atmosphere spread in the port of Mordor. The pirates who were originally fooling around all became well-behaved. All of them gathered with solemn expressions. One by one, the pirate leaders hurriedly rushed to the meeting hall. Their expressions were all rather solemn, as if a storm was about to arrive. Half-elf first mate, Casa. Red-haired female pirate Adele, Isabella. Drow warrior leader Dark Blade, Andri. Scarface. One-eyed dragon. Tiger Shark. Knight. Butler. Soren's pirate leaders gathered in the council hall. Scarface, who had just regained his left hand, had a fierce expression. He had been silently wiping his sword. Soren stood in the middle of the hall. He looked around at the pirate leaders and said in a deep voice, "Snake Island has fallen." The hall was very quiet. The other pirate leaders obviously knew the news before they came. There was no fear in their eyes. On the contrary, there was a kind of bloodthirsty excitement. This period of silence made them thirsty for blood and slaughter. After all, they were all fierce and bloodthirsty pirates in the past. As they had witnessed the establishment of Mordor City with their own eyes, these pirate leaders had enough confidence in Soren. So their first reaction after hearing the news was that they no longer had to stay in their nests to build. Snake Island had fallen. His Excellency Throatcutter must be furious. There was almost no doubt that he would go to war with the pirate king Ashrod. Soren's expression was cold. He glanced around the hall and said in a deep voice, "Gather the men. Adele Isabella. You go and gather the pirate fleet in Shipwreck Bay. One-Eyed Dragon. You go to Port Tylon to gather men and ask the Sea Temple for support. Kasa, half-elf first mate. You lead the dragon-headed ship to cut off the eastern route. Don't let any ships of Ashrod near the south coast. Dark Blade, Andri. You send someone to inform the High Priest of the Drows. They must send men to fight in this battle. Others, gather your men and follow me. This time, we want to fight with Ashrod. Face. Open. Fight. P.S. That's all for today. A chapter of 4,500 words. It should be 2 chapters tomorrow. Chapter 352. Following Soren's order. The whole of Modo began to operate crazily. All the pirate minions who were lazily gathered in the taverns began to gather, and the materials stored in the warehouse were transported out in batches. Although Soren had stored a large amount of materials on Snake Island, the important part was still transported to Modo City because this was Soren's base camp. Whether it was weapons, food, ammunition, etc., they were basically enough to meet the needs of the camp. The atmosphere of a war filled the air. Teams of patrol guards began to gather, and rare-grade weapons from the north were distributed in large numbers. Dragon leather armor was armed to the elite pirate guards, and the equipment on the drows were all replaced. Soren also had a lot of good things in his hands. Although they were not great equipment, as a pirate king, it was not difficult to take out a batch of rare grade 1 equipment. Many pirate leaders called for people to gather, and the warships docked near the port moved all the goods down, and then replaced them with batches of ammunition, weapons, and medical supplies. Even the blacksmith's shop was filled with the sound of sharpening knives. After being lazy for a month or 2, they were finally going to war. After killing the pirate king Ashrod, Soren would completely dominate the south coast. As long as one was not an idiot, one could see that Soren's focus was on the outer islands. In other words, if the pirate king Ashrod was defeated, the eastern sea route would need a pirate leader to manage it. Whether it was the half-elf first mate, the red-haired female pirate Adele Isabella, or other pirate leaders, they all thought that they also had a chance to compete for the leadership of the eastern sea route. If they could be entrusted with the important task of managing the eastern sea route by Soren, it would be a position that was second only to one person. Mr. Kim. Near the port, a young woman in a cloak said, "Is that Throatcutter really planning to go to war with Ashrod? Ashrod has the support of the Naga royal family behind him, and recently I heard that he has hooked up with the vicious Duke of Red Dragon's wife. A legendary dragon disciple is not easy to deal with, and he may not have much chance of winning." Kim had a playful smile on his face, and slowly said, "Isn't that good? Pirate King Ashrod is openly provoking him. He can't back down now. If he did not counterattack in such a situation, the Throatcutter's status and reputation would suffer a heavy blow. However, even with the support of the Sea Temple, his chances of winning are not very high. If he loses, we can take the opportunity to make more demands." The young woman's expression seemed a little strange. She said slowly, "What if he loses?" Priest Jean glanced at him. His lips did not move, but his voice could be heard. "Then this place should have a new owner." The two looked at each other and smiled. The teachings of the Lady of Wealth were completely egoistic, which was why they were in the neutral camp, and more often than not, they were inclined towards evil. Mordor City. Soren's mansion. Gloria appeared in Soren's room, wearing a black robe. She said with a serious expression, are we going to fight? The Duke of Red Dragon's wife is not easy to deal with. Soren nodded. Yes. I know. But the current situation is already difficult to back down. I have risen in the sea for too short a time. Because I defeated the Swamp King head-on, it deterred others and made the other forces near the south coast not dare to act rashly. But if such a thing happens and I don't do anything, then others may take the opportunity to bite back. They will think that I am not strong enough. At that time, not only the Pirate King Ashrod, but I am afraid that the Storm Lord of the Amazon, the Chamber of Commerce Alliance on the south coast, and even the Sea Temple may bite back. Soren's sense of smell had always been very sharp. When he heard the news of the fall of Snake Island, he had already realized that this war was inevitable. Even if it was now the season for farming in Mordor City, the Shadow Plain needed to be explored slowly, and the nearby indigenous people needed to be cleaned up. But in fact, he did not have so much time. If he did not start a war, it would be a serious blow to the morale of his men. At that time, his men in Port Tylon and Shipwreck Bay might be disloyal. After all, the time of Soren's rise was too short. His prestige had been accumulated through numerous victories and cruel massacres. He absolutely could not allow the enemy to stand above him and provoke him. That's good. With Gloria's wisdom, she understood after a little thought. She nodded gently and said, I'll go with you. No. Soren shook his head at this time and said, you must stay in Mordor City. At this time, I don't trust others to stay in the base camp. Only with you here can I fight with peace of mind. Gloria could not help but look at Soren worriedly and whispered, but I'm afraid you don't have much chance of winning against the Duke of Red Dragon's wife. Not to mention the Naga Siren royal family behind the Pirate King Ashrod. Soren was silent for a moment, then said, the Sea Temple will definitely make a move. The gap between the two sides is not big. Gloria shook her head gently and said, in this case, the Sea Temple may not go all out. Otherwise, Snake Island would not fall so easily. There was a short silence. Just when Soren was about to speak, Vivian's voice suddenly came from outside the door. She seemed to be eager to try, brother. There's still me. Leave that bullshit Duke of Red Dragon's wife to me. The little girl was wearing a black princess dress. Her expression seemed to be a little excited. Her cute little face was full of the desire to fight, as if she had been holding it in. There's more. Vivian had a bloodthirsty smile at the corner of her mouth. She stretched out her little hand and grabbed the cat girl next to her, and said in a crisp voice, and Lulu is also very powerful. She can fight 3 by herself. No. At least 5. No. Maybe 10 of them. The poor cat girl was held by Vivian by the corner of her clothes. She was as obedient as a puppy. When she saw Vivian's gaze turn to her, she quickly nodded desperately and said, meow. Lulu is very powerful. Want to fight 10. Meow. The little cat girl stretched out her claws. She felt that one claw was not enough to count to 10, so she quickly stretched out the other claw. Beast men had the ability to transform. In the battle state, part of the body's characteristics may change from human to beast characteristics. Lulu had extraordinary agility at such a young age, so her bloodline must be more unusual. Vivian? Gloria fell into deep thought, then looked up and said, the odds of winning are not very high. I have to set up a magic circle on your warship so that I can use it as a teleportation beacon. I can support you at any time when necessary. Soren did not refuse. After all, a legendary dragon disciple was really not easy to deal with. He nodded gently. But at this moment, suddenly, Gloria raised her head, looked around, and said coldly, who is it? Who is it? Please come out and meet me. Soren clenched his curved sword in an instant, and his whole body was tense, ready to fight. Vivian also narrowed her eyes and carefully looked around. Only Lulu did not move, and she still looked silly. Soren's perception was definitely not worse than Gloria's. Lulu, as a beast man, should have the strongest intuition, but even she did not have any reaction. The most likely possibility was that the visitor was not in the current space. Only the nature of the plane close to Soren could not detect it. As a northern witch with prophecy, Gloria could detect it. Daughter. A magnetic voice full of charm sounded, and then a figure covered in a black robe appeared outside the door. She raised her head and looked at Gloria in front of her, then turned her eyes to Soren next to her and said slowly, "Long time no see. It seems that you are about to become a legendary. Sure enough, your vision is always better than mine." Gloria's mother. Corinne? Soren was a little stunned when he saw her, but he did not relax at all. When Gloria saw her mother, she could not help but frown, and then her face changed greatly. "Mother. You?" "Yes." The fallen northern witch nodded gently, and her expression was unprecedentedly calm, and said slowly, "I have fallen. I made a deal with a powerful existence in the lower plane. The aura of a demon." Soren's perception was quite sharp. When he heard this sentence, he immediately noticed a trace of a demon's aura. Gloria's expression was serious, and she said slowly, "What are you doing here?" The fallen northern witch got up and walked into the room. After seeing Vivian next to her, she was a little surprised, but then she said calmly, "To help you. The news of you coming to the south coast spread widely, and I guessed that you were here. I didn't expect to encounter such a thing. If you want to deal with Ashrod, I can help you." Gloria's expression did not relax at all. Instead, there was a kind of sadness from the bottom of her heart, and she sighed, "What do you want?" In the end, her mother fell. Although she foresaw some fragments of the future, she did not expect that she would actually make a deal with a demon. Fortunately, it was not a demon. Otherwise, her soul might be in the contents of the deal. "It's him." Gloria's mother looked up at Soren, and then did something that even Soren did not expect. She bowed slightly to express her respect, and then said, "Your Excellency Throat Cutter. Please forgive my ignorance and short-sightedness in the past. In the past, pride, regret, and jealousy blinded my heart." Unimaginable. Not only was Soren shocked, but even Gloria was in disbelief. Was this really her mother? That arrogant and mean woman. Why did she have a completely different feeling after she fell? It was as if her soul was sublimated. In Gloria's memory, she had never seen her mother apologize. Not to mention in such a humble manner, recounting her mistakes in the past, and at the same time, her expression was so calm. Gloria took a deep breath. The change in front of her seemed to be unexpected, and she said in a deep voice, "Mother. What do you want? I don't believe that you would come here for no reason." Gloria's mother looked at Soren again, and slowly said, "Him. The man outside of fate. The man who stood up when the goddess of fortune flipped the coin of fate. When I first met him, he was still an unknown thief. But now, he's the ruler of the South Coast, and he's on the verge of becoming a legend. I have enough reason to believe that he is the man outside of fate, and only he can change my fate. I don't have too many requests, I just want him to change my fate when I am bound to fail. In return, I'm willing to give him anything he wants." Gloria's mother turned her eyes to her daughter, and seemed to notice the distrust on her daughter's face. Because she was a fallen one, a witch who made a deal with demons, even her own daughter didn't believe her words. This discovery made Karina show a wry smile on her face, and she slowly said, "In the past, I was confused by pride and prejudice. After leaving the north, I went to a lot of places, and finally I figured out one thing. That is, I am willing to give up something for what I pursue. Finally, I found the answer in the desert, and I have devoted all my efforts to it. I lost my husband, and I am about to lose my only daughter. I've spent my entire life on it. For it, I changed from a noble witch in the north to an exile, and a fallen one. I will never give it up, so I am willing to give up everything for it. I gave up pride, remorse, harshness, dignity, body, soul, silence. A deathly silence." Soren didn't know what the fallen northern witch in front of him was referring to, and why she was willing to give up everything. But now the woman in front of him gave him a shock. A shock that was hard to describe with words. At this moment, he couldn't help but think of himself when he walked barefoot for thousands of miles in the north. That moment of enlightenment and perseverance were so vivid in his memory. For Vivian, he was willing to give up everything. There was something about the fallen northern witch in front of him that reminded him of déjà vu. Mother. Gloria's face showed a trace of sadness, and she murmured, "You." Karina's expression was very calm. Even though she said such shocking words, she still looked quite calm, as if she was talking about something unimportant. She slowly said, "I am still me, but I was blinded by my soul in the past, and now I finally see through all the fog. Your Excellency Throat Cutter. My only request is that you can change my fate one day in the future. In return, I'm willing to give you everything. I can give you what my daughter can give you." Fallen Witch was still so calm. That was real calmness, not a disguise of acting ability. She seemed to have found something in her heart, so her words touched people's hearts like the truth, and made people feel that she was real. This kind of reality was terrible. It was also respectable. At this moment, Soren's perception of her changed completely, because he found that the woman in front of him was the same kind of person as him. It was just that they pursued different things. Soren was doing it for Vivian, and she was doing it for something else. Gloria turned her eyes to Soren beside her. Her expression at this moment was quite complicated, with sadness, anger, sadness, and many other emotions that could not be expressed in words. Because the one standing in front of her was her mother. But now her biological mother had become a fallen witch who made a deal with the devil, and her soul might not even be in her hands. Trust. It was not as easy as imagined. Soren fell into silence. He looked at the fallen witch in front of him with a serious expression and said slowly, "Which demon lord did you make a deal with?" Silence. Fallen Witch was silent. Her expression was difficult and bitter, and then she slowly took off her clothes, revealing her white and delicate skin that was like milk. There was a very strange tattoo on her chest near her ribs, which looked more like a birthmark. It was a red lip that was pierced by an iron wire. The red lip was so seductive, as if it was full of shocking beauty, and some kind of power that tempted people to fall into the deepest darkness. Soren's expression was ashen. Gloria's expression was quite ugly in an instant. She glared angrily at her mother and roared, "Demon! Demon! Girl! King! You're crazy! Do you know what the consequences of making a deal with her are? You idiot!" Soren had never seen Gloria so angry. She was always so elegant and moving, but at this moment, she was completely different. Her anger. Her sorrow. It even affected Soren, who was next to her, making him feel how disappointed Gloria was at this moment. Fallen Witch slowly pulled up her clothes. Even at this moment, her expression was very calm, and she slowly said, "I know. But only the succubus queen can give me what I want. I'm destined to be the loser of fate. So, why don't I bet all my chips? Daughter. You're better than me. But there are some things you'll never understand. The succubus queen." Soren's expression was complicated, as if he didn't know what to say. He recognized the emblem of the succubus queen. It was a red lip pierced by an iron wire, a very special and shocking emblem. It was just like this troublesome demon lord. Anyone who made a deal with her would not have the slightest advantage, and in the end, they would be eaten alive. She was one of the demon lords that Soren was most afraid of. The fallen witch in front of him actually had her emblem on her body. God knows what she put in the deal. After all, the demon lord of the abyss was the most evil and depraved existence. P.S. Yup. Got stuck yesterday. Just finished writing this chapter today. I don't know if you're satisfied. Anyway, I tried my best. Chapter 353. This night was destined to be special for many people. Just as Soren was actively preparing to deal with the Pirate King Ashrod, a secret meeting was also held in Clear Spring Town, 150 kilometers north of Whiterun City. This was a rather remote town. Because it was close to Whiterun City, it was slightly affected by the ancient red dragon. However, people only knew that there was a red dragon near Whiterun City, but they didn't know that it was a terrible ancient red dragon. In this dark secret room, the 5 figures covered in cloaks sat down together. They looked at each other and then nodded gently. Let's begin. The first to speak was a woman, a very beautiful woman. This woman had a delicate face, but from her forehead to her chin, there was a shocking scar. The blood-red scar seemed to be a mark, making it so unforgettable at first glance. The beautiful woman tapped the table gently, then turned her gaze to the others and said slowly, "Since we are all here, then let's discuss how to deal with Reinhardt. I don't know how he got the Helpheimer, but now even the chief priest was defeated by him. The elites in the Church of Fear have been wiped out, and it won't be long before they fall into his control." The atmosphere gradually stiffened. The others present looked at each other and seemed to be silent at this moment. That's right. They were all children of fear. Since the vampires and even Reinhardt became gods with the vampire ghost godhood, the other sons of fear felt uneasy. This made them, who should have been hunting each other, unite in order to survive. The 5 people present got some connections by chance, and then there was the current roundtable meeting to discuss how to deal with the vampire god. What should we do now? The one who spoke was a rather strong man, who seemed to be a barbarian, with extremely exaggerated muscles and a powerful body. He tapped the table gently and said in a deep voice, "Are we all going to sit and wait for death?" A cold and gloomy voice sounded. The thin man sitting in the left corner looked at the others and said slowly, "We can sit here, we should have a trace of trust in each other. Maybe if we join forces, we may not be his opponent." Join forces. Hearing this, the others were silent. How to join forces? How could they guarantee that the others would go all out in battle? How could he guarantee that the other sons of fear would not stab him in the back? It was already difficult for them to sit together. The beautiful woman with a scar on her face glanced at the others who remained silent. Then, she took out a file out of thin air and handed it to the 4 people present. She said slowly, "This is the information I've collected. Can you guys take a look?" The first one to pick it up was the skinny man. After quickly glancing through it, he handed it to the person next to him. Soon, everyone had read through it. Throat cutter? The burly barbarian put down the scroll and asked, "What does this guy have to do with us?" The beautiful woman glanced at him with contempt in her eyes and said slowly, "Pay attention to the time of his rise. It just so happened that after the battle in the City of Wealth, he quickly rose to prominence in the South Coast. And there were other sons of fear in that battle." When she said this, the others present couldn't help but ponder. The man who had been silent at the beginning slowly said, "What do you mean? He is also a son of fear? This throat cutter can rise to prominence in the South Coast so quickly and become the Pirate King. He must be quite powerful. If we can win him over, our chances of winning will increase a lot." The beautiful woman sitting at the head chuckled and said, "It's not that simple. I think he is not only a son of fear, but also the first son of fear to awaken. In other words, he is stronger than any of us." Silence. Hearing the words of the beautiful woman in front of them, everyone present was silent. After a long time, the skinny man sitting in the corner raised his head and said, "Then what should we do?" Soren couldn't predict what would happen in the southern part of the continent. In fact, he had already assembled the fleet and set off the next day, but he had one more thing to do before he set off. Dong dong dong. The dull sound of the war drums sounded. Soren came to the port wearing a black suit. Behind him was a team of heavily armed pirates, as well as elite pirates equipped with dragon leather armor and rare-grade weapons. Today was the day of the war. Soren needed to boost the morale and give his men the confidence to win. But he didn't say too much nonsense, nor did he promise any generous rewards, because it wasn't needed at all. Dong. Soren stood on the high platform of the dock. His sharp eyes looked around at everyone present, and then said in a deep voice, "Raise the dragon head. Raise. Dragon head. Raise. Dragon head." A loud shout came from below him, and then he saw two burly and powerful elite pirates, each holding a huge dragon head, appear. The ferocious white dragon head was carried out. All the pirates who saw it with their own eyes couldn't help but show a hint of shock on their faces. Even Pastor Kim and others who stood by watching the ceremony were surprised. A white dragon head. And it looked like the head of an adult dragon. Raise. Along with the pirates' shouts, the white dragon's head was carried onto the warship, and finally fixed on the dragon head warship that defeated the Swamp King. This was the real dragon head warship. When the white dragon's head was hung on the giant dragon head warship, all the nearby pirates' eyes were red with blood. Many of them even hammered their chests with their hands, and roared with eagerness to fight. "It's really a dragon head." A young woman's voice came from behind Pastor Kim, and whispered, "It seems that we still underestimated him. This throat cutter actually managed to kill an adult dragon. He used the dragon head to declare war at this time, and it's quite amazing for the morale of his men. Look at the group of pirates below. They all seem to want to fight with Ashrod immediately." Dragon Head Warship. This warship that originally belonged to the Swamp King was truly complete at this moment. Soren stood on the high platform and looked down at everyone. His eyes paused on Gloria and Vivian for a moment, then he pulled out his curved sword and pointed directly at the distant sea. Rumble. Suddenly there was a vibration from the bottom of the sea, and then the water on all sides separated to the left and right. In the surging waves, a black mast emerged, and then a ghost ship full of death and slaughter emerged from the bottom of the sea in front of everyone's eyes. As the fog spread, the specter ship in front of everyone became blurry. Through the fog, they could only see the broken hull and sails, as well as the ghosts wandering on the specter ship. The aura of death spread. Pastor Kim's face was full of uncontrollable shock, and the girl standing behind her also opened her mouth in surprise. Ghost ship. Pastor Kim looked up at Soren's position and murmured, "He actually has a ghost ship. It looks like a ghost warship that's close to the legendary level." Ghost ship, dead man's voice. The aura of death made the other pirates quiet down for a while, but there was a force brewing in everyone's heart. Soren looked down at them. Finally, he raised the curved sword in his hand and shouted, "Fight! Fight!" A uniform roar sounded, and the elite pirates all pulled out their weapons and roared towards the sky. "Fight!" Sauron let out another roar. "Fight!" The surrounding pirates reacted one after another, then followed the elite pirates and let out a roar at the same time. "Fight!" Soren's figure stood high up, his tall and straight body like a mountain, and roared towards the sky. "Fight!" A deafening roar resounded, and all the pirates drew their weapons. Their expressions were incomparably excited as they let out a series of roars. "What a powerful guy." Pastor Kim looked at Soren, who stood high up, and murmured, "This guy is a master at playing with people's hearts. The morale of these pirates is probably going to explode." The young woman nodded and said in a low voice, "It seems that we have to reevaluate him." On the other side, Vivian stood in the corner and looked at Soren, who was above the crowd. There was a glimmer of brilliance in her eyes, and she murmured, "Brother looks so powerful now." Gloria, who was next to him, did not reply, but her eyes became gentler. Only Fallen Witch still had a calm expression, and her eyes fell on Soren. There were only some slight movements, but it could be seen that she was not as calm as she looked on the surface. The battle broke out. The two most powerful pirate kings on the south coast were going to compete. The winner would win the hegemony of the south coast. And the loser would not even have a corpse left. The Storm Lord, who had been dominating the Amazon coast, seemed to be quite silent. She had not expanded her power outside the Amazon territory for nearly 100 years. It seemed that she intended to watch the battle between the pirate kings coldly. No one knew who would be the final winner. So in this battle, the other forces on the south coast chose to be silent and wait for the final result. P.S. That's all for today. The end of this volume was written very slowly. Chapter 354. South Coast, Snake Island. The dragon-headed warship docked near Soren's former base camp. From a distance, one could see the traces of the fire on Snake Island. The entire camp had turned into ashes, and there were masts erected near the dock. There seemed to be something hanging on them, floating with the whistling sea breeze. A large number of seabirds gathered near the dock. When the warship approached, they were immediately startled. The dark flock of birds scattered in all directions, and then the corpses hanging on the masts were revealed. All of them were Soren's men. After the fall of Snake Island, these people became captives, and then they were hung on these masts by the pirate king Ashrod's men. This was not only to establish his power, but also to provoke Soren. "Your Excellency, throat cutter." When he saw the corpses of his men hanging on the masts one by one for the seabirds to eat, Scarface's expression became agitated again. His face was ferocious and distorted, and his eyes were bloodshot. He looked like he was about to eat someone. Soren patted him on the shoulder to comfort him, and then said in a deep voice, "Send a team to bury the corpses. We will make them pay. Set sail. Let's go to Port Tylon." Just as Soren was about to lead the fleet to Port Tylon, a strange whimper suddenly came from the bottom of the sea nearby. Soren seemed to have felt something. As if something was calling him, he immediately waved his hand to signal the others to stop, and then jumped into the sea with a plop. There were many things under the blue sea. Because of the battle, the wreckage of many sunken ships could be seen at the bottom of the sea, but the thing that called Soren was deep in the sea, and that feeling was a little familiar. "It's him." Soren finally saw the creature that called him. It was the mutant killer whale that he had subdued. Part of its body had rotted, and there were dense wounds on its abdomen. The rotten flesh attracted many sea creatures, and there was even a spear inserted near its chest. With such injuries, it should have died long ago. Soren noticed that a large chunk of flesh had been sliced off from the side of its body. He wasn't sure if it was due to its mutation or something else, but it still retained an amazing recovery ability. Even though most of its wounds had decayed, it still maintained a weak life force. Many ships sank near it, including medium-sized warships. It was obvious that the pirate king Ashrod had paid a high price to deal with it. It was not easy to kill such a sea monster in the sea. As Soren got closer, the calling became weaker. Most of the killer whale's body had sunk into the sand. Its body was covered with various marine parasites, some of which had even drilled into its flesh. This kind of injury was too serious. It was basically impossible to save it unless there was a high-level priest casting restoration. Soren quickly approached the killer whale. He pulled out his scimitar and cut off the arrow. Then, he gritted his teeth and pulled out the spear near its chest. Then, he took out several bottles of healing potions and poured them into its mouth. The effect of the healing potions was too weak. As a mutant sea creature, the killer whale had quite an amazing vitality. In turn, the amount of recovery needed to treat it was even more amazing. Damn it! As Soren pulled out the deadly spear, a large amount of blood gushed out, and the mutant killer whale's breath became weaker and weaker. Without a high-level priest, no one could do anything about this kind of injury. It had been holding on for a long time. In this case, there was no way to heal it. Even with its huge body, Soren could not transport it back to Port Tylon. Because a little violent movement could kill it. Damned Asrid. Soren's eyes were filled with murderous intent. He slowly pulled out his scimitar and walked in front of the mutant killer whale with a blank face. The world under the sea was very dark, and icing death glowed slightly because of the cold temperature. Soren squatted down and stroked its head, then slowly said, "Rest in peace." Such an injury. It was torture to let it hold on all the time. It was better to give it relief now. Clang! Soren's scimitar was raised, but it did not fall. Instead, it stayed 10 centimeters above. because a row of messages appeared in front of his eyes. Divinity activated. The target creature's attitude towards you is fanatical, loyal, triggering the condition of divinity gift, automatically mastering a new ability, divinity gift. Minor divinity activated. Part of the divinized data attribute conversion. Target has no divinity. Divinity data conversion failed. A strange data prompt appeared. Soren stopped his scimitar in an instant, and at the same time opened the data page to check the strange information that suddenly appeared. Divinity gift, gifted ability. You can give a part of your divinity to a target, which can greatly strengthen the target's strength and turn it into a divine creature. After completing the divinity gift, the target creature will have a certain spiritual connection with you. The effect is at least equivalent to suggestion. At the same time, you will be able to influence and even control the target's will. In the case of the divinity gift, you can use the target as a temporary host, as your holy incarnation in the mortal world. Required divine form. Note, because you are not in the divine form, you can only give divinity to the target that fanatically worships you. Divinity? Soren's expression was a little shocked, and then he seemed to have thought of something, and his face showed a thoughtful expression. Chosen? Holy One? Soren glanced at the dying mutant killer whale in front of him. His expression was a little hesitant, but then he pressed his hand on its head. Divinity was a very powerful force. The gods could give part of their divine power and divinity to their believers. These people who had the power of the gods were the legendary chosen ones and holy ones. This kind of bestowment did not necessarily need to be done among the believers, because Gloria's mother could suddenly become a legendary witch because she received the divinity gift from the succubus queen. This was a very overbearing ability. Because once the power from the gods was accepted, it was equivalent to being branded. This could be seen from the Sons of Fear, because they did not actively receive the divinity gift, but the will of the Dread Lord had a great impact on them. If they actively received the gift of divinity, then the final result was very likely to be turned into a fanatic of the gods. Divinity gift. A strange light appeared in Soren's eyes, and there were some traces of distortion in the space around him. His whole person seemed to be shrouded in the power of divinity, and he looked like a god overlooking the mortal world. As his palm pressed on the mutant killer whale's body, a trace of divine power penetrated its body and soul, and then Soren had a weak telepathic connection. It felt like a spiritual transmission, and he could switch his consciousness to the mutant killer whale in front of him at any time. Even if he wanted to, he could temporarily use its vision. The saint is the eye of the gods. As Soren injected 1 point of divinity into the mutant killer whale in front of him, amazing changes began to appear. Its weak heartbeat gradually became strong, and its already decaying body glowed with amazing vitality. Some of the injuries began to regenerate. The mutant killer whale, which had already entered a state of near death, struggled to swim up, and then opened its mouth to swallow a piece of marine life nearby that was attracted by its flesh and blood. 1 point of divinity. The Swamp King probably only had 1 or 2 points of divinity on him. Soren had fought so many times, and the divinity he accumulated was only 12 points. As he gave 1 point of divinity to the mutant killer whale in front of him, the divinity he had was reduced to 11 points. However, the effect of this 1 point of divinity was quite huge. The mutant killer whale's appetite was awakened, and it ate the fish in the nearby sea area crazily. At the same time, through the spiritual control produced by Soren's divinity, it expressed a kind of joy like a new life. As a kind of non-intelligent creature, the resistance of the mutant killer whale after receiving divinity was quite weak. Soren could even control its consciousness. The mutant killer whale ate crazily. Its huge body swam like a shadow on the bottom of the sea, and at the same time, it opened its bloody mouth and swallowed a large number of fish. The gift of divinity was like injecting a qualitative factor into the quantitative change. Soren could feel that this mutant killer whale was evolving little by little in the direction of a sea monster. As a divine creature, it directly jumped the threshold of mutation, and now it only needed to accumulate numbers. This time, it might take several days to eat. Soren could feel the crazy hunger in its heart. 1 point of divinity had already changed its nature. Before it mutated into a sea monster, this hunger would shroud it. A figure emerged from the bottom of the sea. Soren gently jumped onto the deck of the Dragon Head warship. He glanced at the huge shadow on the bottom of the sea and said in a deep voice, "Let's go." To Port Tylon, 1 point of divinity completely changed the fate of the mutant killer whale. At the same time, it also allowed Soren to touch a more mysterious realm, which belonged to the realm of the gods. Although he had a weak divinity, he could not give divine power like the gods, but he could, like the higher demons in the abyss and the Bator Inferno, give a part of his own divinity to the target, and then influence or even control the target's will. P.S. The next chapter ends this volume. Chapter 355. Following Soren's departure from Snake Island, the huge shadow on the seabed also moved towards the deep sea. 1 point of divinity allowed the mutated tiger shark's soul to sublimate. As it devoured more and more flesh, the injuries on the mutated tiger shark's body also quickly recovered. Divinity was a power that surpassed the mortal world. It was even more powerful than mutated magical creatures. When divinity was accumulated to a certain degree, it could turn a creature into a god, or it could turn them into even more terrifying abominations. The divinity that Soren bestowed upon it naturally didn't originate from the power of light, justice, or kindness. In fact, from the moment he bestowed it with divinity, the mutated tiger shark was shrouded in a desire to kill. It devoured countless sea creatures along the way. The mutated tiger shark's injuries had already mostly recovered. Its rotting flesh was gradually regenerating, and its metabolism was progressing at an astonishing speed. As it devoured more and more flesh, its body even surpassed the size of the blue whale. Moreover, as its body grew larger and larger, the mutated tiger shark's back began to grow malevolent and sharp bone spurs. Its incomparably sharp fangs began to regenerate, and on its skin that originally belonged to a mammal, dark green scales began to grow. The scales were about the size of an adult's palm. It no longer looked like a shark, but more like some kind of terrifying mutated sea monster. The crazy eating satisfied its desire for flesh, but the thirst for slaughter still tormented its soul. The mutated tiger shark finally stopped eating. Its body had completely surpassed the blue whale's, and its weight was perhaps twice that of an adult blue whale. The incomparably huge mutated tiger shark's appearance had completely changed. Its body was covered in scales, and its back was full of bone spurs. Its bloody mouth had no less than 5 rows of incomparably sharp fangs, enough to easily cut any creature into pieces. It gradually approached the deep sea, and its incomparably sharp ability to detect fresh blood allowed it to discover a new target. The mutated tiger shark swam its huge body forward at high speed. Unknowingly, its pupils had already turned slightly red. It looked a little similar to Soren when he transformed into a slaughterer. Finally, it discovered a new target. It was a huge deep-sea squid. This deep-sea squid was hunting a whale, which was similar to a humpback whale. The size of the adult whale had no advantage in front of this huge sea monster. It was tightly entangled in the sea by its strong tentacles. The deep-sea squid had incomparably sharp mouthparts. It was unknown how long this sea monster had existed, but when it discovered the approach of the mutant tiger shark, it very vigilantly let go of its prey, and then retracted its incomparably huge hands. The battle broke out soundlessly. The mutated tiger shark did not hesitate at all. It rushed forward like a sharp sword, opening its bloody mouth to bite the enemy in front of it. Blood gushed out from the wound. The battle between the two ocean beasts had stirred up waves in the sea, and large patches of blood had gradually dyed the seawater red. Port Tylon. Soren's fleet was docked at Port Tylon. But when Soren approached Port Tylon, a row of data appeared in front of his eyes. It was an inexplicable data, killed squid, sea creature. Divinity of slaughter energy conversion. Extracting part of soul energy. You've gained 1050 slaughter EXP. It was a very strange prompt. This sudden data prompt made Soren a little confused, and the sudden gain of slaughter EXP made him completely confused. He did not do anything special during this period of time. In addition to giving the mutated tiger shark 1 divinity point, Soren spent the rest of his time learning spells. So this sudden slaughter EXP was most likely related to the mutated tiger shark. Because it was hunting and eating, if it killed the target, then things would be a little interesting. Divinity of slaughter. If the mutated tiger shark killed the target, Soren could also get a part of the slaughter EXP. Then, he had inadvertently touched upon an even more wonderful divine domain. This reminded him of the priesthood of war. Whenever there was a large-scale war in the world, any god who had the priesthood of war and the divine domain of war would have their divine power increased. In order to strengthen their divine power and priesthoods, some evil gods with the priesthoods of war would deliberately instigate wars to expand their territory. Slaughter. This was a very scary domain. Because since ancient times, as long as one had a part of the divine domain of this domain, they were basically gods with great divine power. Soren did not know the reason. But he knew that the divine domain of slaughter, soul, and death could increase the soul energy obtained after killing the target. So the sudden slaughter EXP prompt at this moment was most likely related to the mutated tiger shark, and it was triggered by the 1 point of divinity he gave. Because Soren's divinity was the divinity of slaughter, not the divinity of fear that Vivian had. Your Excellency, throat cutter. The half-elf first mate's figure appeared near the port. He had blood stains on his body. After coming to Soren, he bowed slightly and said, "The eastern route has been blocked. Ashrod's people were all wiped out by us, and some of them were captured. Now in the entire south coast area, all ships from the eastern route can't enter the south coast area." Very good. Soren nodded gently. He glanced at the others in front of him and said in a deep voice, "What about the people of the Sea Temple?" The half-elf first mate's face stiffened and whispered, "The Naga Siren priest said that this time we have to do it ourselves. The pirate king Ashrod has not publicly betrayed the Sea Temple. She doesn't want to turn things into an internal struggle of the Sea Temple. So this time it can only be regarded as a battle between the pirate kings, but she said that she will contain the power of the Naga Siren royal family and ensure that no Naga Siren will intervene in this battle." Soren's face instantly turned pale when he heard this, and he shouted angrily, "This bitch. She was the first one who wanted to deal with the pirate king Ashrod." Now that Soren had started a full-scale war, this bitch actually said that she didn't want it to become an internal struggle of the Sea Temple. What was the use of containing the Naga Siren? Did the Naga Siren dare to openly betray the sea goddess? In the end, she still wanted to preserve her strength so that Soren and Ashrod would both suffer. This son of AB*TCH forgets justice at the sight of profit. From the beginning to the end, except for a ghost ship, she basically didn't show any real cards. What's the movement of the Principality of Rossard? Soren frowned deeply and glanced at the half-elf first mate. The Duke of Red Dragon's wife is in charge of a principality, and she can't act rashly. Did you find out her whereabouts? The half-elf first mate shook his head and said, "I'm incompetent. I only found out that the navy of the Principality of Rossard was dispatched to Raging Sand Island. There is a city built by Ashrod there, and I'm afraid they plan to fight us there." Soren was silent when he heard this. He expected the Sea Temple to be sneaky. After all, he was growing too fast, and there was also the Temple of Wealth. The Naga Siren priest was too scheming and narrow-minded. It was normal for her to be afraid of his strength and want to consume his strength. However, when he heard the news, his heart was still full of anger, and his dissatisfaction with the Naga Siren priest became stronger and stronger. She clearly stood behind the sea goddess and the Sea Temple, but she had always been afraid of Soren's strength and could not suppress it. It seemed that she was not a long-term partner. What about the captives? Soren took a deep breath and turned to look at the warships docked in Port Tylon. He said in a deep voice, "Even if the Sea Temple doesn't fight, we can still defeat Ashrod. Bring all the captives up." The half-elf first mate retreated. Soon, rows of captives were pressed up. Since Ashrod attacked Snake Island, Soren naturally needed to pay him back. He directly pulled out all his strongholds on the south coast. "Throat cutter. You're dead." A pirate captive whose face was burned by fire saw him and immediately laughed and scolded, "Ashrod will hang your head on the flagpole. You're all going to die." Plop. The elite pirate escorting the captives directly punched him to shut his mouth, and then the half-elf first mate quickly explained, "He's Ashrod's half-brother. We caught him alive when we attacked the stronghold." "Half-brother? Looks like he's a human." Soren walked in front of the captive expressionlessly and whispered, "I won't be the one to die. I'll send him to hell soon." Shang. A streak of cold saber light flashed. Then a head fell to the ground, a large amount of blood gushed out, and the headless body fell down. Soren's expression was cold. He didn't look at the headless body under his feet, and then he waved his sword again and cut off the head of the second captive. One by one, heads fell to the ground and rolled around. Blood had dyed the dock red, but Soren's footsteps still didn't stop. He harvested the heads expressionlessly until the last captive died under his sword. There were a total of 127 captives. All of them were beheaded by Soren on the spot, and no one was left alive. Port Tylon was shrouded in a strong smell of blood, and heads were piled up in the center of the port. I'm afraid before the end of the battle, these heads would always be piled up here, making anyone with bad intentions think twice. Because as long as Soren didn't completely fail, they had to consider the price of rebellion. The price would be very heavy. It was also on this day. People's name for Soren gradually changed from throat cutter to beheader. P.S. Volume 2 has finally been written. I'll start writing Volume 3 in the afternoon. After finishing this volume, it'll be much easier to write. Chapter 356. P.S. Look at the exclusive story behind Lord of the Abyss, listen to more of your suggestions for the novel, pay attention to the Chinese network's public account, add friends on WeChat, add public account, type dread, and tell me quietly. P.S. Fixed a mistake, it's a mutant killer whale, not a mutant tiger shark. Port Tylon. More than 100 heads were simply pickled with lime, and then neatly piled up into a statue, placed in the center of the port. With the arrival of the decisive battle between the two pirate kings, the trade of the entire south coast was temporarily suspended. Cargo ships were docked at the port, and they did not dare to go out to sea at this time, for fear of being affected by the battle between the pirate kings. War is always the most destructive thing, and the war during the turbulent period completely destroyed the prosperity of the current mainland. Warships approached Port Tylon one after another. When the fleets from Shipwreck Bay, the outer islands, and Port Tylon gathered, people were surprised to find that Soren the Decapitator had unknowingly owned hundreds of warships, enough to rival the naval forces of a kingdom. The warships gradually approached the shore. Then, a group of fully armed and ferocious pirates gathered. They came from many places. There were pirate leaders of large forces and pirate leaders of small forces. They came more because of their fear of Soren and their confidence in his victory. Because Soren defeated the Swamp King, because he controlled the dragon warship, Dragon Head, because he conquered a northern witch, and because he also had a ghost ship in the legends, and so on, even the active pirates near the City of Wealth came to seek refuge. The actions of the Church of Wealth could not be hidden from these local snakes. They coveted the wealth of the eastern route, which was a bigger cake than the outer islands. Goods from the east, no matter what it was, were several times the profit. The pirate king Ashrod firmly controlled the eastern route, and they had no chance to intervene. But as long as they helped Soren defeat the pirate king Ashrod, the eastern route would definitely be divided into a batch of profits. South Coast. The real value of the outer islands was the mines occupied by the indigenous people. If these mines could not be taken from the indigenous tribes, then the value of the outer islands was only 1/3 of the eastern route. The only troublesome thing was that the eastern route was more dangerous, and it took longer to go back and forth. Sir. The half-elf first mate appeared in front of Soren and said in a deep voice, 121 warships have responded to the call, and there are a total of 3,215 pirates who can fight. There are still some pirate leaders on the way, and it will take them a day or two to arrive. Soren was the pirate king. He was equivalent to the head of the Forest Alliance. If they didn't respond to his summons under such circumstances, they would be punished after the war. This was the right of the Pirate King. Even if they weren't Soren's direct subordinates, the pirates that were active in the South Coast had to listen to his orders. I can't wait that long. Soren stood on the deck of the dragon-headed warship, looking into the distance, and said in a deep voice, "We can't wait that long. We will set off tomorrow to attack Raging Sand Island." "Yes," the half-elf first mate said with a solemn expression. That night, Port Tylon was completely different from the past. There were no more playful crowds on the streets, and the taverns were quiet. People spoke in low voices. The sheriff in charge of Port Tylon was a little frightened. He doubled the patrol guards to the previous level, and even went to the Sea Temple to visit the Naga Siren priest. Because Soren had gathered too many people, so many pirates were enough to attack Port Tylon. If there was trouble, the consequences would be quite serious. The natives of Port Tylon closed their doors, and there were no idle people on the road. Only the port area was brightly lit until dawn. Teams of strong pirates could be seen transporting weapons and materials to the warships. Heavy cannons, boxes of gunpowder, and the smell of war enveloped the island city. The next day, the person Soren was waiting for arrived. It was a gift prepared for him by Gloria. With the emergence of a portal, a northern witch of about 40 years old with a stiff face appeared. Behind her stood two other young northern witches. "Your Excellency Soren?" The middle-aged witch with a stiff face glanced at Soren and nodded slightly. Counselor Gloria used the A-level authority to apply for the right to transfer any A-level strategic materials of the Northern Witch Council. This is the strategic material she applied for. Please accept it yourself. Soren just nodded, and the middle-aged witch with a stiff face cast a spell to open a portal. Then the space in front of them was linked to the interior of a wizard tower. The portal only lasted for a short period of time, so they couldn't see what was inside, but they could feel that it was a very majestic laboratory. Then, two incomparably tall steel golems appeared and carried out something that looked a bit like a mortar but only had a similar appearance. Superconducting Arcane Crystal Pulse Cannon Experimental Model I-1. The middle-aged witch with a stiff face looked at Soren with a serious expression and said in a deep voice, "The superconducting Arcane Crystal Pulse Cannon has been charged, but please note that it can only fire one energy pulse attack." The superconducting Arcane Crystal Pulse Cannon Experimental Model I-1 is an A-level strategic material of the Witch Council. As an experimental model, it can carry out a long-range energy pulse attack with an effective range of 120 kilometers and an actual range of 50 kilometers. Because there is no wizard tower to operate as a hub, I suggest that you attack within 30 kilometers. Counselor Gloria applied for the right to use it. The superconducting Arcane Crystal Pulse Cannon is still the property of the Witch Council. If there is any damage, you will compensate the Witch Council 3.6 million Kindler. The middle-aged witch with a stiff face took out a document engraved with mageweths and handed it to Soren. She said in a deep voice, "These two steel golems are responsible for protecting the superconducting Arcane Crystal Pulse Cannon Experimental Model I-1. At the same time, they will operate it to attack according to your orders. Please pay attention. This weapon must be protected. It is one of the only remaining experimental products of the Witch Council. If there is any damage, Counselor Gloria's authority will also be punished." Soren nodded silently, then took out a ring that looked like a coat of arms and pressed it gently on the document. The light of a spell appeared. The middle-aged witch pointed to the dragon-headed warship, and the two steel golems carried the superconducting Arcane Crystal Pulse Cannon onto the deck. This weapon looked a bit like a mortar. It was a little different from the ones Soren had seen in the half-elven city. It seemed to be an imitation of the Witch Council. The curve of the barrel was quite smooth, and the slender barrel did not have an opening. The trajectory was 3 interlaced runes, and at the end, there was a purple gemstone that looked like a steeple. This was not a traditional alchemy gunpowder weapon, but an energy weapon from the Arcane Empire. To be honest, Soren was not sure how powerful it was, but it certainly would not let him down. because it had a strong sense of science fiction in the interstellar era. The base of the superconducting arcane crystal pulse cannon was a square alchemy structure, a bit like the transformation device of the golems. After it was transported onto the deck, it automatically extended a bracket to fix it. The barrel was only the size of an adult's arm, and the whole body was shiny silver white. Soren reached out and touched it slightly, and found that it was infiltrated with a large amount of mithril. Only mithril could withstand such a large amount of energy without blocking the transmission of energy. The alchemy device from the Arcane Empire, with Soren's current knowledge, he could not understand it at all. But he felt that this weapon was not too far away from the electromagnetic pulse cannon of the interstellar era. It was purely an intuition. He was still full of respect for the arcane civilization that could send a city into the sky and transform it into a floating city. Signing completed. The middle-aged witch with a stiff face looked at him and said in a deep voice, "Mr. Soren. Please take good care of it. After the energy is fired, we will automatically track the space coordinates and take it back." After that, she directly opened a directional portal and left with the two young witches behind her. "Let's go." Soren glanced at the others, and then ordered his men to cover it up, leaving only two steel golems to guard the superconducting arcane crystal pulse cannon. He stood on the high platform of the dragon-headed warship, looking down at the others and said, "Go to Raging Sand Island." Woo woo woo. The bleak sound of a horn sounded. As the dragon-headed warship took the lead to leave the port, the warships docked nearby all set sail. More than 100 pirate ships sailed into the sea, heading toward Raging Sand Island, which was occupied by Ashrod. Pirate flags fluttered in the wind. Pirate warships of different shapes formed a fleet, moving along the eastern route. They would enter Ashrod's territory in a day. In the deep sea area invisible to the naked eye, a broken ghost ship was also slowly moving forward. The undead bound on the ship were working expressionlessly. Only when there were marine creatures nearby, their faces showed a trace of thirst for blood and slaughter. Ghost ship, the dead man's voice. It was hungry. As a ghost ship with a life of its own, it had been cast by a legendary master to animate life. It fed on death, flesh, and souls. However, ever since the battle with the Swamp King, it had been quiet and had never had the chance to taste blood and slaughter. As an animate life, it had no wisdom, but it had the instinct of a creature. It longed for death. In another deeper part of the sea, as if it was aware of the call from somewhere, a huge shadow rose from the bottom of the sea. The first thing that appeared was a bone spur as thick as an adult's arm on its back, sharp like a javelin. This huge shadow floated to the surface of the sea, stayed in place for a moment, and then moved toward a direction at high speed. The master was summoning it. This is a good activity where a pie falls from the sky. Cool phones are waiting for you. Click on the Chinese network's official account, add friends on WeChat, add a public account, type Dread, and participate now. Everyone has a prize. Follow the official account of Dread on WeChat. Chapter 357. P.S. Read the exclusive story behind Lord of the Abyss, and listen to more suggestions for the novel. Pay attention to the Chinese website's official account, add friends on WeChat, add official account, type Dread, and tell me secretly. Raging Sand Island. This was the largest island within a radius of 500 kilometers. It was surrounded by golden beaches and a dense forest in the center. The city built by the pirate king Ashrod was here. Originally, there were many indigenous people here, a bit like the Ryukyu kingdom. However, after Ashrod unified the eastern sea route, it became a pirate's base camp. Compared to Soren's rule under the cruel law, the pirate king Ashrod's management was much more chaotic. As long as there was no rebellion, he rarely intervened. Therefore, the number of indigenous people near Raging Sand Island became fewer and fewer. In the end, only pirates were left in the city. A city with only pirates was not lively. This was the largest place to sell stolen goods on the eastern sea route. Ashrod dared to accept anything that could make money. Rumor had it that this place even dared to touch some forbidden areas, and there were cases of people eating each other. Unlike the outer islands, which took at least a month to go back and forth, no news could be blocked for too long. However, the Eastern Sea route took a long time, and the possibility of encountering a storm monster was very high. If it weren't for the fact that there were too many missing people, Ashrod wouldn't have been suspected. Soren's fleet approached the overseas city. He stood on the observatory with a monocular and looked at the port and warships in front of him. He saw pirate ships with flags and naval warships from the Principality of Rossard. What made him a little uneasy was that Soren found some strange warships. Eastern warships. Most of the warships of the Eastern pirates were fast ships. Soren had seen such warships in the past, near the port near the Desert of Death. That was the territory of the Eastern pirates. They and the desert bandits controlled the sea and land trade respectively. These bandits had the support of nobles behind them, and even the Eastern pirates had the backing of a rather powerful monastery. Eastern monks. Monks were not professions like paladins. There was no lack of lawful evil among them. It's the Eastern pirates. Soren descended from the observation deck and glanced at the fallen witch beside him. He then said in a deep voice, "Asrid has been operating the Eastern Sea route for many years. I'm not surprised that he's able to rope in the Eastern pirates. No wonder he suddenly dared to fight me head-on. It turns out that other than the Principality of Rossard, there's another group of helpers. The Principality of Rossard's strongest troops were the heavy infantry. The navy is their weak point. In fact, because of the existence of the Sea Church, there are not many powerful navies on the entire south coast. Pirates from the east?" Fallen Witch Karina looked into the distance and whispered, "Those monks are not easy to deal with." Soren nodded. "I know." When the raging sand island appeared in front of Soren, the warship on the other side also noticed them. With the appearance of a large battleship with a Naga siren's ram, the other battleships also gathered towards it. Asrid's warships were actually more than Soren's. The Principality of Rossard's navy sent out dozens of warships, as well as the pirate warships under his command and the pirate ships from the east. The number was probably close to double that of Soren's, but Soren only brought medium-sized warships, while the other side was mixed with some small fast ships. "I didn't find the Duke of Red Dragon's wife." Fallen Witch's palm appeared with a magic aura, and then it turned into a pair of white eyes. This was the wizard's clairvoyance, an observation spell. "Brother. Let Vivian deal with them." The little girl seemed quite excited today. She looked forward eagerly and said, "It's just a group of big wood. Vivian can kill a lot of them by herself." Soren put his hand on her shoulder and said in a deep voice, "Don't underestimate the enemy. There must be spellcasters on the other side. The Duke of Red Dragon's wife came from an ancient sorcerer family. If he dares to declare war on us, he must have some confidence." Hundreds of warships were facing each other in the vast sea. The pirates gathered together. The coming war made many people feel a little nervous. It could be said that such a large-scale naval battle had rarely happened in the past 100 years. Soren didn't know much about naval warfare. But as a top rogue, he had a keen sense of observation. At a glance, he could see that the fleet on the other side was divided into 3 parts. First, the Principality of Rossard's navy was in a battle formation. They were a regular naval fleet and must have been trained accordingly. Then there was the pirate king Asrid's fleet. These warships were like Soren's men. They could barely gather together to protect the 2 wings and couldn't form any formation at all. It was estimated that the pirate king Asrid usually commanded a dozen warships at most. Now that there were hundreds of warships, he couldn't command them at all. He also had a mix of people from different places. Finally, there were the Eastern pirates' warships. They numbered about 10, and all of them were medium-sized ships. Their positions were not very close, and it seemed that they didn't intend to fight to the death for Asrid. The core of Soren's fleet was only 16 warships. The Dragonhead warship, the half-elf first mate, the red-haired female pirate Adele Isabella, Cyclops, Scarface, Giant, Butler, Knight, and so on. These pirate leaders each led their own warships in formation, surrounded by the pirate leaders under their command. Without military training, Soren could only let his men spread out to command them. Otherwise, there would be no way to command them when the battle broke out. Naval warfare was not like marching on land. These pirates would easily fight for themselves after the battle. Woo woo woo. The strange sound of a conch suddenly came from afar. Soren's face suddenly changed slightly and shouted, "Be careful. There's movement under the sea." A black shadow appeared from the bottom of the sea. Then, a medium-sized ship on the side of Soren's fleet trembled. The next moment, it suddenly turned over and sank to the bottom of the sea. In an instant, the others finally saw the silhouette of the black shadow. It was a huge sea snake with 3 heads. A medium-sized warship was like a toy in front of it. In the blink of an eye, the warship was overturned and sunk into the sea. "Let me deal with it." Fallen Witch Kalina frowned. She seemed to notice that the morale of her side was a little low for a moment. She said in a deep voice, "It's a sea monster. I'm afraid it's a 3-headed dragon." Soren reached out to stop her. He frowned and looked at the front. He said in a deep voice, "No need. Damn Naga priestess. Didn't she say that the Naga sirens wouldn't get involved in this battle?" In the entire sea domain, besides the Naga sirens, who else could control a sea monster of the Naga sirens? This bitch's words were getting more and more untrustworthy. Boom. Attack. Just as the 3-headed sea serpent overturned one of Soren's warships, the pirate fleet on the opposite side also launched an attack. The sailors began to load ammunition, and the burly pirate commandos were ready to fight when they got close. Soren's warships were attacking from the front. The navy of the Principality of Rossard and the Eastern Pirates' warships surrounded him from the side. They planned to eat Soren like dumplings. Greed is like a snake trying to swallow an elephant. Soren snorted coldly and opened his mouth to make a silent roar. With his call, a huge shadow appeared from the side of the enemy. A mutant killer whale. No, no, no. It should be the sea monster, Hakas now. After receiving a divinity point from Soren, the mutant killer whale had exceeded the size of the blue whale. It was nearly 50 meters long and weighed more than 300 tons. There were bony spikes on its back that were as sharp as javelins. The scales on its body strengthened its defense and allowed it to withstand greater impact. It rushed into the enemy's right flank like a ferocious monster and sank a warship in an instant. At the same time, it set off huge waves that hit the nearby pirate ships. In front of the sea monster, these warships were too small. Cheers sounded. The low morale suddenly recovered because compared to the 3-headed sea serpent lurking at the bottom of the sea, the mutant killer whale was more oppressive. Rumble. A burst of gunfire sounded. Soren turned his gaze to the half-elf first mate behind him and said in a deep voice, "I'll leave it to you to command." After that, his figure flew out and ran at high speed on the sea as if he was running on flat ground. Walking on water. Under the effect of haste, Soren could finally do this. Rumble. In the middle of the battlefield, the seawater on all sides suddenly separated to the left and right, and then a black mast appeared. Then the ghost ship, Deadman's voice broke through the surface of the sea and appeared in the air. The ferocious undead turned their cannons and aimed at the pirate warships on both sides. The next moment, the cannons fired and sank the 2 enemy warships in an instant. The dragon-headed warship was in the middle. What really possessed the most destructive power was the quasi-legendary Spectre. Heavy Boomerang. Soren pointed his curved sword, and the sea spirits behind him turned their bow cannons. 2 heavy boomerang cannons fired instantly and sank an armed ship equipped with 36 cannons. Animated life, undead characteristic. Just when Soren sank 2 warships in a row, the enemy also aimed their cannons at the ghost ship. However, no one needed to steer. Under the will of Soren, the ghost ship automatically changed its sails, and then summoned a fog on the sea and escaped into the fog at an amazing speed. Behind them was the sound of gunfire and the excited howls of the wraiths after getting satisfaction from killing. This ship was alive and could sail automatically according to the will of its master. Get ready for battle. Soren looked at the undead behind him. These undead lives bound to the ghost ship showed a grim smile on their faces, then waved their heavy weapons and prepared to land on the enemy's warships in the fog. They were immortal undead. As long as the dead man's voice didn't sink, they would never truly die because their souls were one with the dead man's voice. Animated ropes. In the fog, the dead man's voice quietly approached a battleship. In an instant, the ropes all over the ship were like flying snakes. They automatically entangled the battleship next to them as if they were alive. The tough ropes swept out like poisonous snakes, strangling the enemies on the deck and then hanging them up. Swoosh! Soren took out the elven war bow and instantly shot an enemy who was hung up by the animated ropes. The next moment, the ropes were quickly loosened and then wrapped around another enemy. The battle had just begun. This is a good activity where a pie falls from the sky. Cool phones are waiting for you. Click on the Chinese network's official account, add friends on WeChat, add a public account, type Dread, and participate now. Everyone has a prize. Now follow the official account of Dread on WeChat. Chapter 358. P.S. Read the exclusive story behind Lord of the Abyss, and listen to your suggestions for the novel. Pay attention to the Chinese website's official account, add friends on WeChat, add official account, type Dread, and tell me secretly. Naval battles were not easy. Even for powerful spellcasters, this kind of battle environment also made them feel helpless. When Soren controlled the ghost ship, Deadman's voice to kill the pirates, the enemy's spellcasting also locked onto his position. The fog slightly blocked their vision, but for powerful spellcasters, it was not difficult to find him. But then a problem appeared. If they wanted to attack Soren, they had to close the distance. The firepower of the 24 cannons was quite fierce, and there was also a mutant killer whale nearby. It was basically difficult for other warships to get close. Most of the spellcasters had flying spells, but if they flew over, it meant that the target was exposed. At the same time, they also needed the support of flying spellcasting. Vivian, who had already landed on the ghost ship, smiled sweetly. The little girl was wearing a black princess dress. She raised her hand and threw out a dispel spell. Splash! The sound of falling into the water came from the front. With Vivian's legendary spellcasting level, the dispel spell she threw out could crush these spellcasters. The flying spell was dispelled, and the spellcasters who were just about to attack Soren all fell into the sea. What awaited them below was a bloody mouth. Under the situation of falling at high speed, even Soren found it difficult to cast spells. Under their feet was not flat ground, but an endless sea. No matter how noble a spellcaster was, if they did not cast spells, they would just swim in the sea. Vivian would not give them a chance to cast spells. In fact, if it was not for the Duke of Red Dragon's wife who had not yet appeared, the little girl who was eager to try would have already started a massacre. A bunch of trash. Standing on the sea demon warship, Ashrod flew into a rage and roared, "A specter ship is enough to make you lose your footing. Aim the cannons. All of you aim at it. Sink it." Cannons were aimed at the position of the ghost ship. Under the command of the pirate king Ashrod, the enemy, who had been slightly alarmed by the appearance of the ghost ship, reacted. Then hundreds of cannons nearby all aimed at the ghost ship. He actually wanted to use the firepower to directly sink Soren's Deadman's voice. Under the attack of hundreds of cannons, even if the specter ship could automatically change its direction, it would not be able to avoid such a dense net of firepower. Boom! 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 The dull sound of cannon fire shook the sky. The intersecting firepower on both sides covered almost all the escape routes of the ghost ship. No matter how it changed its sailing position, at least a dozen cannons would hit the hull. Ghost dive. Soren's expression remained calm. He stared ahead and ordered, "Dive to the bottom of the sea." The dark hull of the ship began to sink. The ghost ship gradually sank to the bottom of the sea, and the water surged in from all sides. The undead who were killing on the other pirate ships all jumped into the sea, and then swam to the deck of the ghost ship. The fog became a little thinner. After 5 minutes of intensive firepower, the Pirate King Ashrod saw nothing in front of him. There was only the sea covered by fog, and no ship wreckage was seen. There were many bodies floating on the calm sea, but all of them were his men. His face was quite pale at the moment. The ghost ship itself was a very terrible existence in the sea. Now that this terrible existence was controlled by a person, its combat power was even more amazing. The battlefield on the opposite side was also much quieter. Soren's men were not sure about the situation just now. They only saw the cannons aiming at the ghost ship. They were not sure whether the ghost ship had been sunk or whether Soren had died under such intensive firepower. After all, even a legendary profession might not be able to withstand intensive gunfire. Boom! The sea on the side suddenly separated. The Pirate King Ashrod's face suddenly changed and he roared, "Attack! Attack! Attack!" Boom! Boom! 2 heavy cannons responded to them. A dark mast rose from the side of the sea, and the ghost ship, Dead Man's Voice, appeared on the sea again. With its appearance, the surrounding fog became thicker again. The ghost ship's figure escaped into the fog, and only a blurry shadow could be seen. It was difficult to determine its specific position without closing the distance. Damn it! The Pirate King Ashrod's face was quite ugly. He shouted to a man dressed as an officer next to him, "Where is the Duke of Red Dragon's wife? Where is the support I asked for? Hurry up and let them sink this ghost ship." The officer had been watching the changes on the battlefield with a blank expression. He noticed that the pirates on the flank of Soren's camp had signs of collapse. They were no match for the navy of the Principality of Rossard. At the same time, because of the 3-headed sea serpent, the originally dense formation had been loosened. In order to avoid this sea monster, many warships distanced themselves, exposing quite obvious defensive gaps in the middle. At this time, if there was a fleet like a sharp knife, it could completely cut Soren's formation. Let the eastern pirates attack. The stout officer glanced at Ashrod, and then said to a warlock wearing a cloak like a woman, "That ghost ship. Can you deal with it?" A cold female voice rang out. Legendary animated life forms. The hull, sails, cannons, and the whole ship are animated ropes that bind the undead who died under its hands. This ghost ship can deal with dozens of warships. If the Duke of Red Dragon's wife doesn't do it herself, we can't deal with this ghost ship. And there seems to be a very powerful spellcaster on it. The female warlock with a cold voice suddenly frowned, and then her figure rose into the air like an eagle. She said coldly, "Looks like a little girl. I'll deal with her." Boom! A pair of blood-red dragon wings spread out. The female warlock who had been hidden in the cloak revealed her true appearance. It was a beautiful young woman, at least she looked quite young. She was wearing a silver silk robe with many runes inlaid on it. She held a strange scepter in her hand, which looked more like a spiked mace. From her back was a pair of huge red dragon wings. This pair of dragon wings allowed her to fly easily, and set off gusts of wind while flying. Dragon Disciple. Dragon Wings Awakening, innate ability, level 9 Dragon Disciple will further awaken the dragon's ability. At this time, they will obtain a pair of dragon wings according to the dragon's bloodline they inherited. This pair of dragon wings allows them to fly freely in the air. This ability is an innate ability. When activated in the state of transformation, it cannot be removed by any spell. The young woman flapped her dragon wings and rose into the air. Then her petite body swooped up under the action of the huge dragon wings. She raised her hand and threw out a fireball, which instantly hit the deck of the Dead Man's Voice. Dragon wings were her innate ability, so dragon disciple warlocks with dragon wings did not need the support of flying spell casting because they did not need to cast 2 spells at the same time. "Brother, be careful." Vivian's clear childish voice sounded. The little girl narrowed her eyes and locked on the air. She said excitedly, "Madam Duke of Red Dragon. You finally appeared. Divine power manifestation." The little girl's figure rose into the air. As she stretched out her small white hand and clenched it, a 15-meter-long flame whip appeared in her palm out of thin air. This was a whip that was completely formed by flames. The scorching temperature burned the air, and with its appearance, the surrounding temperature rose by a lot. It was as if it was radiating a scorching aura in all directions. Baylor's Whip. Spell-like ability, a tattoo-like magic pattern appeared on the side of Vivian's face, and a pair of small demon wings appeared on her back. They were still not fully grown, but it did not affect her flying ability. "Ah! Ha!" The little girl shouted and raised her 15-meter-long flame whip. She raised her hand and lashed out at the dragon disciple in front of her. The flame whip seemed to burn the air as it passed through. While lashing out at the enemy, it also left a trail of flames in the air. A whistling wind came. The dragon disciple in mid-air dodged and then stopped at a position nearly 100 meters high. He said coldly, "Demon Warlock? You guys really have something to do with demons." Swoosh! A sharp arrow was shot from the dead man's voice and instantly hit the dragon disciple in front of her. However, when it was 20 centimeters away from her, an invisible energy field blocked the arrow. The arrow exhausted its power and fell lightly. "Vivian, be careful." Soren's voice sounded in the little girl's mind, and he said in a deep voice, "She's not the Duke of Red Dragon's wife. The Duke of Red Dragon's wife hasn't appeared yet." In front of her was only a level 9 dragon disciple. Any dragon disciple could awaken a pair of dragon wings as long as they raised their profession level to level 9. She was not the Duke of Red Dragon's wife that Soren had seen before. The little girl heard this and temporarily put away the big move that she had prepared. She waved the flame whip and floated in midair. She looked up at the dragon disciple and snorted coldly, "Vivian is not a demon warlock. Shameful woman who doesn't wear anything down there should shut up." Her whole body stiffened. The young dragon disciple's face showed an angry expression. She didn't expect this little girl to have such good eyesight that she could even see through the energy field of her wizard robe. "Shut up." The young dragon disciple scolded, and like a real dragon, she opened her mouth and spat out a scorching dragon breath. Dragon disciple versus divine warlock. Vivian chuckled and waved the flame whip. It directly absorbed the scorching dragon breath, and the flame on the Baylor's whip became hotter and hotter. This is a good activity where a pie falls from the sky. Cool phones are waiting for you. Click on the Chinese network's official account, add friends on WeChat, add a public account, type Dread, and participate now. There's a prize for everyone. Follow Dread's official account now. Chapter 359. P.S. Look at the exclusive story behind Lord of the Abyss, listen to more suggestions for the novel, pay attention to the Chinese network's public account, add friends on WeChat, add public account, type Dread, and tell me quietly. Ashrod. When Vivian faced the young dragon disciple, a large warship with Naga siren armor also appeared in Soren's sight. Pirate King, Ashrod. This bastard who once betrayed Soren and let him deal with the Swamp King alone, and then sneak attack Devil's Island to steal the fruits of victory. Soren didn't touch him for a while, but he didn't expect this guy to dare to sneak attack Snake Island. Now that he finally saw this guy, Soren's eyes suddenly showed a strong murderous intent. Brute Strength, Extreme Spell. Mel's Minute Meteor, Extreme Spell. Cat's Grace, Extreme Spell. When the outline of the Naga Siren warship appeared in front of Soren, he began to cast spells quickly. He continuously cast a set of extreme spell buffs, and then his whole body rose into the air. His toes touched the water gently, and then his whole body stepped on the water and ran at high speed on the sea. Behead. Kill Ashrod. At this moment, Soren didn't hold back at all. When he flew close to the Naga siren warship, he roared fiercely, and his whole body made a crackling sound. Then his pupils enlarged and became bloodshot, and finally turned into a strange blood-red color. Transform into a slaughterer. Soren's figure suddenly jumped up after approaching the Naga siren warship. The power in the transformed state was quite amazing, and the solid deck cracked directly. His figure rose into the sky like a cannonball, and a high-speed and condensed minute meteor flame appeared in his palm. After locking the position of Ashrod, he threw it directly. Boom! There was a violent explosion. A hole was blown out on the deck of the Naga warship, and one of Ashrod's followers died on the spot. Melf's minute meteor was equivalent to Soren's all-out attack. His figure was still in mid-air, and the attack was like an anti-aircraft gun. Minute meteor flames fell from the sky and landed on the helmsman of the Naga warship like a dense bombardment. Violent explosions rang out one after another. Soren fired 9 micrometeors in a row in a short span of 1 second. Relying on the astonishing agility of the slaughterer transformation, all of them hit their target's location. A huge hole was blasted in the sturdy deck, and the corpses nearby were all smashed into pieces. The continuous explosions destroyed everything within a 5-meter radius. The pirate king Ashrod, who had been in charge of the eastern sea route for many years, was blown into pieces by Soren before he could even let out a fart. In fact, when he was attacked, he activated several pieces of equipment in a row, but he only blocked the attack of 3-minute meteor. Then he was drowned by the roaring minute meteor flame. Melf's minute meteor, which was known as the lesser god slaying spell, easily broke through his defensive equipment. Under hundreds of explosive burning damage, a quasi-legendary pirate king fell. Pata. Soren's figure landed on one knee, and the flame in his palm gradually extinguished. Melf's minute meteor could only support less than 10 attacks. As a level 5 spell under the effect of spell maximization, it was supposed to be a continuous combat ability, but it became an explosive ability because of Soren's high-speed attack. Soren did not have many advanced spell slots left. The 3 maximal spells left him with only half of the 4th circle and 5th circle spell slots. After landing, he pulled out 2 curved swords and slashed at the enemy in front of him. Dang! Sword form, spinning strike. Soren's opponent was an expressionless middle-aged officer. He had slight burn scars on his body, and the weapon in his hand was a relatively rare rapier. He was able to block Soren's powerful moves. Damn it! The middle-aged officer glanced at the minced meat in front of him and said, "This piece of trash." He was beheaded so easily. Roar. In the face of Soren's fierce attack, he suddenly roared, and his body swelled like a barbarian. This was not a berserk ability, but another ability that Soren was not familiar with. It was more like some kind of forbidden evil. "Brother, be careful." Vivian's cry of surprise suddenly came from the sky. Then, a strange red figure appeared in the sky. She descended from the sky in an arc and raised her hand to cast the immobilization spell. Hold human body spell. The Duke of Red Dragon's wife. She finally appeared at this moment, but her target was Soren in front of her. She also wanted to behead her target. When Soren successfully beheaded the pirate king Soren, she strangely appeared nearby and then locked on to Soren. A row of data appeared. You've been attacked by human hold. Test of fortitude triggered. Test of fortitude passed. You're immune to this spell attack. Where did she come from? Soren's perception was not weak, and the opponent's attack did not even trigger his intuition. The only explanation was that she was not nearby just now. The spiritual realm. Soren suddenly thought of something. High-grade spellcasters could let themselves enter the spiritual realm. The spiritual realm was a parallel plane to the material plane. Most people present could not see people in the spiritual realm. This was similar to the tactics of legendary rogues, because legendary rogues could also enter the shadow plane, and then directly travel from the shadow plane to the material plane. Did I pass the test of fortitude? Soren was overjoyed. In an instant, he activated Evade's sight and went into stealth. Detect invisibility. The Duke of Red Dragon's wife cast spells very quickly. With a magic aura, Soren's figure appeared 10 meters away. Vivisection. Level 8 spell. With a magic aura, the Duke of Red Dragon's wife showed a cruel smile on her coquettish face. In an instant, Soren's figure froze, and his mouth made a beast-like roar of pain. His skin and flesh had a strange reddish hue to it. It was as if his skin had been cut by a scalpel, and there were small blood-red scars on his skin. Command, shock. Another spell fell from the sky, and Soren's figure froze in place. However, this spell seemed to have a limited effect on Soren. He only paused for a moment and regained his freedom. What a strong vitality. The Duke of Red Dragon's wife frowned and murmured, "Demon blood? How can a rogue have the vitality of a warrior?" The shock spell was quite effective against enemies with low vitality. However, if the enemy's vitality was too strong, then the probability of passing the test was quite high. Shadow leap. Soren couldn't attack the Duke of Red Dragon's wife who was in midair. He went directly into the shadows and then appeared on the edge of the deck. The dead man's voice was close. With a plop, his figure jumped into the sea and disappeared without a trace. I can't fight recklessly. Soren's means of attacking the air were bows and arrows. Perhaps the arrows couldn't even break the energy shield of the Duke of Red Dragon's wife. A legendary dragon disciple. With Soren's current strength, even if he transformed into slaughter, he didn't have much chance of winning. He could only barely survive. It was really her. It was another person who had been waiting for a long time. Fallen Witch, Kalina. When the figure of the Duke of Red Dragon's wife appeared, the Fallen Witch disappeared strangely. When Soren's figure fell into the sea, the Fallen Witch in a black robe appeared near the dead man's voice. She raised her hand and cast a spell towards the Duke of Red Dragon's wife. Greater Disjunction. Disintegrate. Mordenkainen's Disjunction. Legendary spellcasters had a number of defensive means. The most important thing to kill them was to break their defensive force field. Realm of Fear. Time stop. Vivian had been waiting for her to appear for a long time. She suddenly abandoned the opponent in front of her and flashed to the Duke of Red Dragon's wife. She then cast the legendary spell Time Stop. Accident. Chain accident. When the figure of the Duke of Red Dragon's wife was frozen in midair, intensive triggered spells burst out like fireworks. A series of magic auras emerged one after another, and endless protective energy fields enveloped her. For a while, she didn't know how many defensive spells were triggered. Just her equipment alone had 5 or 6 magic auras. It was quite difficult to kill a legendary spellcaster. Soren was not sure whether Vivian and the Fallen Witch could break the opponent's protective force field during the duration of the spells, so in order to pursue the greatest result, he did not hesitate to give the order to attack. Legendary Dragon Disciple. Their vitality was comparable to that of a legendary warrior. They were equivalent to half a dragon. Even without any defensive spells, it was quite difficult to kill them. The base HP of a legendary dragon disciple was 12 points. Soren's rogue only had 6 points, the wizard had 4 points, and the shadow dancer had 8 points. Dragon Head Worship. Following the operation of the steel golem, a purple light appeared on the experimental Model I, one of the super arcane crystal pulse cannon. Then, like an electromagnetic charge, an incomparably powerful energy converged on the silver-white barrel. The incomparably powerful energy even caused the surrounding space to slightly distort. The jumping energy arc seemed to have layers upon layers of texture. Energy activation completed. Super Arcane Crystal Pulse Cannon Experimental Model I, 1 locked on target. Fire. A purple energy light cut through the sky. The next moment, it pierced the body of the Duke of Red Dragon's wife. The highly condensed energy even passed through the field of Time Stop and opened a huge hole in her chest. There was no blood at all because all the blood had evaporated. But this was just the beginning. The purple energy light broke through the air and evaporated the mast of a warship. The upper part of the mast broke and fell down. The energy light spanned a distance of nearly 20 kilometers and finally hit the wall of raging sand island in the distance. Rumble. There was no explosion, only the rumbling sound of collapse. The solid gate, which was nearly 10 meters thick, turned into ruins in the blink of an eye. The whole battlefield was dead silent. What a good activity for a pie in the sky. Cool mobile phones are waiting for you. Click on the Chinese network's public account, add friends on WeChat, add a public account, type Dread, and participate now. Everyone has a prize. Follow Dread's WeChat public account now. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Love Stories YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.